Anna was born in 1983 in Belgrade, Serbia. She pursued her passion for the French language and literature, earning a bachelor's degree from the University of Belgrade. In 2005, she moved to the United States and eventually gained dual citizenship after settling in Virginia. Anna began her career as a hotel housekeeper, but her hard work, dedication, and kindness quickly impressed her employers. This led to various prestigious job opportunities at luxury hotels and resorts in New England, including the Wheatley Hotel in Lenox, Massachusetts. While working at Wheatley, Anna met Brian Walshe. At that time, Anna was in a serious relationship with someone else. However, after her divorce, she had the opportunity to reconnect with Brian. In 2014, Brian was a complicated man with a troubled past. He was the son of a prominent neurologist who headed the neurology department at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. Despite coming from a wealthy family, he had faced numerous emotional and psychological difficulties. His parents neglected him, which left him feeling unloved and emotionally scarred. They sent him to a prestigious boarding school in Rhode Island, hoping that a good education would compensate for their lack of attention. However, instead of helping him, this only exacerbated his feelings of abandonment. After graduating from boarding school, Brian attended Carnegie Mellon University, a prestigious institution. However, he did not remain there long, as he was forced to leave to enter a mental health facility. Although Brian's parents were able to pay for his treatment, they could not agree on who would be responsible for his care. As a result, he was compelled to leave the facility without the support he needed. Brian lived a varied life and often displayed his love of luxury. One notable occasion was when he bought the entire stock of white truffles at a restaurant in Boston, highlighting his wealth. Even as a teenager, he displayed similar behavior, dressing in a suit and tie while sipping Pepsi in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton, mingling with high-profile brokers. In 2015, Brian's life changed when he met Anna, and they became engaged. They eventually married and welcomed their first child, followed by 2 more children in the subsequent years. However, their life together faced obstacles, including legal issues stemming from fraudulent art sales. Brian used Anna's eBay account to sell 2 Andy Warhol paintings, claiming that they were originals and that he needed to sell them due to a recent renovation. A buyer from California paid $80,000 for the paintings, but upon receiving them, discovered they were fakes and sued Anna and Brian. The buyer alleged that Anna exploited her connections in the hospitality industry to build trust, which enabled her husband to sell the forged artwork. It remains unclear how much Anna knew about Brian's fraudulent activities. However, she wrote a letter to the judge commending Brian for his dedication as a stay-at-home father. While trying to support him, she is also preparing for the possibility that he could face a long prison sentence. She has begun moving her and her son's belongings into a separate home in Washington, D.C., suggesting that she plans to move there permanently. Anna was an extraordinary individual, both in her professional and personal life, known for her dedication and kindness. Those around her felt her influence, and her positive impact was undeniable. One of Anna's defining characteristics is her dedication to her work. She approaches tasks with seriousness and never takes the easy way out. Her confidence and expertise shine through, enabling her to achieve outstanding results. Despite Anna's demanding career, her 3 sons remained her top priority. She was a devoted mother who always put her family first. Her relentless efforts were fueled by a strong desire to give her children the best life possible. Anna's 3 sons mean everything to her, and she cherishes every moment spent with them. Although she often has to travel for work, she makes sure to stay connected with her children. Modern technology, including texting, phone calls, and FaceTime, allows her to keep in touch with them no matter where she is. This connection gives her a sense of security and helps maintain a close relationship with her children. While Anna excelled in her career, Brian stayed home to care for their 3 sons. This situation arose from Brian's involvement in an art fraud case, which led to him being placed under house arrest. With Anna frequently away, Brian took on the important role of ensuring the boys were well cared for. He aimed to create a loving and supportive environment for them, understanding that they depended on him. He took this responsibility seriously by spending quality time with his children and providing them with all the care they needed. In addition to creating a cozy home, Brian worked hard to keep it tidy and functional. On New Year's Eve 2022, Anna and Brian welcomed a close friend into their home at 8:30 p.m. to celebrate together. Anna greeted the friend cheerfully while Brian prepared dinner in the kitchen. The three enjoyed the evening by taking photos and discussing future plans. The friend left at 1:30 a.m., and everything seemed normal in their household. However, on New Year's Day, the friend texted both Anna and Brian to thank them for a fun evening, but only Brian replied, and Anna did not respond, which was unusual for her. Anna had booked a flight for January 3rd from Logan International Airport to Washington, D.C. However, on January 4th, her superiors at Tishman Speyer and her husband, Brian, reported her missing. During the investigation, detectives spoke with Brian, who stated that on January 1st, 2022, Anna left home early to catch a flight due to a company emergency. He mentioned that she used a rideshare service to get to the airport, but he was asleep when she left. However, detectives could not confirm whether Anna had called an Uber or Lyft, and they also did not have any records of her boarding a flight on January 1st. Additionally, her credit and debit cards showed no activity. The detectives contacted their colleagues in Washington, D.C. to check Anna's residence there, but she was not found. Investigators and K-9 teams searched the entire Anna family home and the surrounding areas for clues. In addition to the local police, state and county officers were called in to assist with the search and rescue effort. More than 50 officers were actively involved, utilizing their expertise and resources to look for any sign of Anna. Divers also joined the investigation, searching the nearby streams for possible clues. Unfortunately, despite their extensive efforts, no signs of Anna were discovered, and there was no indication of her whereabouts. 6 days after Anna went missing, a local police detective received a ransom email demanding $127,000. The email was sent by Richard Walker from the address 9984@gmail.com at 5:18 p.m. It claimed that they had Anna Walshe and that she had messed up their agreement for the ransom. The sender threatened that if the money was not paid, Anna would not be returned. However, the ransom note did not include any instructions on how law enforcement should respond or fulfill their demands. As investigators investigated Anna's disappearance, they uncovered suspicious background information about her husband, Brian. In the early 2000s, Brian approached his parents regarding a real estate deal for an old, rundown house in Lenox. He suggested that his father fund the renovations, with an agreement to share the profits when the house was sold. However, things changed when Brian's father invested a significant amount, around $500,000, into the renovations. On the night they were set to close the deal, Brian vanished without informing his family. This left his father feeling betrayed and led to a rift between them. Furthermore, the detectives uncovered several troubling details about Brian. In 2019, after the death of his father, he attempted to sell his father's house, even though he had been disinherited in the will. He was also accused of writing $30,000 in bad checks. However, the most alarming finding was from 2014, when he and Anna were engaged. Anna called the police and reported that Brian had threatened to kill her over the phone. However, the case was closed after Anna stopped cooperating with law enforcement. The detective spoke with Anna's mother, who was abroad at the time. She revealed that Anna had urgently asked her to come to the United States and mentioned having a bad feeling about Anna's situation, especially since she was missing. Given Brian's threats and his legal issues, he became the primary suspect in Anna's disappearance. Investigators found that just days before Anna went missing, Brian had hired a private investigator through his mother to track Anna's movements after losing contact with her for 24 hours while she was in Washington, D.C. He had become suspicious, thinking she might be cheating, and had been closely monitoring her social media accounts for any signs of infidelity. During the investigation into Anna's disappearance, detectives uncovered significant information. They discovered that Anna had been in a romantic relationship with a man in Washington, D.C. When they reached out to him, he claimed that his relationship with Anna was open and that they had spent Christmas Eve together. Due to his alibi, he was quickly cleared as a suspect. However, Anna's affair and Brian's knowledge of it raised suspicions about his possible involvement in her disappearance. On January 9th, Brian was arrested for misleading the police during the investigation. His 3 sons, who had previously been in his care, were handed over to the Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS. Following his arrest, Brian pleaded not guilty. His deception took place during an interview on New Year's Day. During this questioning, Brian told detectives that he left home at 3 p.m. to visit his mother but got lost because he forgot his cell phone. However, further investigation revealed inconsistencies in his story. Detectives obtained security camera footage from Whole Foods and CVS, stores he claimed to have visited, but found no evidence of him being there. Additionally, he was unable to provide any receipts for the items he claimed to have bought. This led detectives to search Brian's home in Cohasset, Massachusetts. In the basement, they found a damaged, bloody knife, which they collected for evidence testing. Crime scene investigators conducted a thorough search of Anna and Brian's home, seizing electronic devices belonging to both them and their children. Among the seized devices was an iPad belonging to their sons, which revealed alarming internet searches made by Brian on January 1, 2023. His searches included phrases like how long before a body starts to smell, how to stop a body from decomposing, and can you be charged with murder without a body. On January 2, 2023, investigators reviewed CCTV footage that showed Brian visiting HomeGoods and buying 3 rugs. They also found concerning Google searches he made that day, such as "Can you identify a body with broken teeth?" Furthermore, Home Depot surveillance captured him pushing a cart filled with cleaning supplies, including mops, brushes, tape, baking soda, goggles, face masks, tarps, and gloves, totaling $450. This raised suspicions about his intentions, suggesting that he may have been preparing for a cleanup. The detectives obtained additional security camera footage from an apartment complex in Abington on January 3rd. The video showed Brian walking toward a dumpster while carrying a heavy trash bag. His effort to lift the trash bag into the trash can indicated that there was something very heavy inside. Unfortunately, when the investigators arrived, they found that the contents of the dumpster had already been taken to a dump, where they were shredded and incinerated. This made it difficult for the detectives to gather further evidence, as the trash bag and anything it contained had already been destroyed. Later, while searching the dumpster behind Brian's mother's home in January, detectives found several suspicious items, including blood-stained trash bags, towels, rags, a Tyvek protective suit, goggles, and Anna's slippers. They also discovered a hacksaw, cutting blades, a purse, and boots that matched those Anna was last seen wearing. Additionally, a part of the necklace she wore on New Year's Eve was found. After analyzing these items at the crime lab, investigators found DNA from both Anna and Brian on the flip-flops and the protective suit, which further strengthened Brian's connection to the case. On the night of January 3rd, Brian returned home and conducted a series of unsettling Google searches. He searched for questions like, "What happens to hair on a dead body? How fast does a body decompose? How does decomposition differ for a body in a plastic bag versus one found on the ground? And can baking soda mask the smell of a body?" These searches raised further suspicions among detectives, who believed Brian was contemplating how to dispose of Anna's body. They also searched a nearby trash transfer facility and found bloodstains there. On January 18th, just over 2 weeks after Anna went missing, Brian was arrested once again, this time facing charges of murder and unlawful handling of a body. Prosecutors alleged that Brian killed Anna by beating her to death, then handled her remains and disposed of them improperly. His case attracted widespread media attention and public interest due to its mysterious circumstances. The Serbian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, through the Serbian Consulate General in New York, worked closely with the Norfolk District Attorney's Office to gather information for Anna's mother, who was in Serbia. In 2024, Brian Walshe received a 37-month prison sentence for an art fraud case. During the summer of that year, the prosecution informed the media that they were still waiting for DNA test results related to the evidence collected. However, They were confident that the results would be received soon. Brian's legal situation changed when his defense attorney decided to withdraw from the case, feeling unable to effectively represent him. This led to his case being handed over to public defender Larry Tipton, who specializes in criminal defense. When an attorney takes over a case, they must review all relevant information and evidence to fully understand it, identify any weaknesses, and create a solid defense strategy. In Brian's case, this review was particularly difficult due to the large volume of over 1,000 pages of documents to go through. In January 2023, psychotherapist Dr. Robbie Ludwig appeared on News Nation and shared her thoughts on Anna Walshe and her marriage. Dr. Ludwig speculated that Anna might have been in an abusive relationship and could have been in danger. Her views were based on her professional insights, as she had neither met nor treated Anna or Brian. During her appearance, Dr. Ludwig suggested that there could have been complex dynamics in Anna and Brian's relationship. She proposed that Brian may have felt intimidated by Anna's financial success and insecure about his lack of financial contribution to the household. Dr. Ludwig believed that this insecurity could have worsened any existing mental health issues Brian faced, such as depression, anxiety, and anger. Dr. Ludwig's theory suggests that Brian might have felt threatened by the possibility of losing everything he valued, including his wife, Anna, their 3 sons, and their comfortable lifestyle. In the same segment on News Nation, a photo of Anna showed a wound near her eye. She had shared this selfie on Instagram prior to her disappearance, captioning it, "Mild concussion, bruised lip, and a cut vulnerability." However, there is no evidence linking Brian to the injury on Anna. Anna Walshe's friends and family are very worried about giving her a proper burial, believing she deserves a dignified funeral. Unfortunately, they do not have the financial means, and her husband, Brian, who is the main suspect in her disappearance, is not cooperating. Consequently, they cannot proceed with the funeral arrangements until the circumstances surrounding her death are clarified. As of now, formal arrangements for Anna's funeral have not been made. Jonathan Candy was a 42-year-old engineer working with the Oklahoma City basketball team. He focused on equipment maintenance and had developed his career over many years, first in sports and then in technical fields, which allowed him to support his family comfortably. In 2024, he had been married for 10 years to his wife, Lindsay Candy, who was 39. They lived in Yukon, Oklahoma, a small, quiet suburb with a population of over 20,000. They had 4 children: Dylan, 18, Ethan, 14, Lucas, 12, and their youngest child, who was just 10. The identity of the 10-year-old was kept private due to his young age and vulnerability. In the spring of 2024, this 10-year-old boy is about to experience a tragic event, an event that will greatly impact his life and those around him. The Candy family was viewed as a model American family, friendly and tight-knit. They have built a strong influence in the community, raising their children in one of the safest and most beautiful suburbs of the state. At that time, Ethan and Lucas were in school, in the 9th and 6th grades, respectively. Meanwhile, Dylan had graduated from high school in 2023 and was preparing for adulthood. He planned to attend college and had found a job to save money while applying to various schools. The Candy family did not have any mental health issues. Their upbringing was stable and uneventful. There were no instances of running away from home, and the parents maintained a peaceful household, allowing their children the freedom to make choices. This environment contributed to a thriving atmosphere at home, where the kids grew up feeling strong, sociable, and loved. They were always supportive of each other and even appeared in a local bakery advertisement, where they were regular customers and shared their favorite meals. Jonathan and Lindsay worked hard to help their children prepare for the future and lead fulfilling lives. However, behind this seemingly happy facade, a terrible situation is unfolding that will create a nightmare on Willow Street. On the evening of April 21, 2024, a Sunday, the whole family gathered at home. The older children spent time with their friends but returned home early to prepare for school the next day and to go to bed on time. Everything seemed normal for the Candy family, and no one anticipated the shocking incident that was about to occur. After dinner, Jonathan went to bed, and each child settled into their own room on the second floor. Later that night, the children overheard Jonathan and Lindsay arguing in the living room on the first floor. Although the specifics of their argument were unclear, it escalated dangerously. Despite the tension, everyone remained calm and went to bed. The youngest boy, whose fan was running, could hardly hear the commotion below. Meanwhile, a tragedy unfolded on the first floor that resulted in the deaths of 5 family members. But what exactly happened, and who was responsible for this horrific crime? In conversations with the only surviving family member, more details emerged after the incident. The fire alarm went off, which forensic experts determined was caused by gunpowder fumes from the shooting. The noise startled the youngest child, who didn't understand what was happening or why the alarm was sounding. Curious, he left his room to investigate, completely unprepared for the horrific scene he was about to encounter. As he stepped into the hallway, he noticed that the doors to his brother's rooms were open. Ordinarily, this might have seemed odd, but he thought everyone had gotten up due to the alarm. He made his way downstairs to the first floor and noticed a light on. He called out for his parents but received no answer. He then called his brothers, but all he got was the continuous beeping of the warning. Hoping to find answers, the boy went to the living room. The first thing he saw was blood splattered on the walls and furniture. In the center of the room lay his mother and father in large pools of blood. His father was sprawled on top of his mother, having suffered a gunshot wound to the head. The boy was terrified and in shock. He rushed to his father, trying to wake him up, not fully grasping what had happened. He saw the bullet holes and felt his parents grow cold, but he refused to believe they were dead. Despite shaking his father repeatedly, there were no signs of life. His mother did not respond either. In a moment of desperation, he called out for his brothers, still unaware that he was the only survivor. Overwhelmed with grief, he cried and collapsed onto his parents' lifeless bodies. He then walked through his brother's room and saw an identical, horrifying scene. Blood was everywhere, and there were no signs of life. Eventually, he realized he needed to call for help. Summoning his courage, he reached out to a rescue worker and requested assistance. This initiated a horrifying sequence of incidents that would lead to a deeper investigation into this unimaginable tragedy. When law enforcement and paramedics arrived, they quickly realized that nothing could be done. The family had been dead for several hours, as indicated by the rigor mortis and the state of the blood on the floor. The parents and older brothers were declared dead at the scene, and the house was cordoned off for investigation. Forensic experts and detectives, horrified, began to reconstruct the scene of the brutal massacre. The idea of an outsider attacking the family was quickly dismissed, as there were no signs of forced entry or any outsiders present. This raised concerns that the murders had been committed by a family member. At some point, the 10-year-old boy was found to be covered in blood, leading police to consider whether he might have been involved. However, his behavior, condition, age, and the evidence quickly eliminated any doubt. There were no traces of gunpowder on his hands, and no fingerprints on the weapon. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the windows and doors and found no signs of staging. Everything in the house was intact, with no valuables disturbed or missing. They reviewed street surveillance footage and only saw the family members returning from the store that evening. No one else had entered or left the house before the police's arrival. The boy mentioned hearing his parents scream before he fell asleep. Since the weapon was found next to the body of Jonathan, the boy's father, it was clear that the father had committed a crime against his family before harming himself. As investigators analyzed the crime scene, it became evident how ruthless and cold-blooded 42-year-old Jonathan had been. The motive behind his actions remained unclear. The police could not determine the cause of the conflict, as no suicide notes were found in the house. They needed to analyze the mobile phones and computers of all family members, which were seized immediately, hoping to uncover new information. However, a complete analysis would take time. It remains a puzzling question why a loving father, who seems to be a good family man, would kill his wife and children but spare his youngest son. The weapon used in the crime was taken for examination, confirming that all members of Candy's family, including Jonathan, were shot with the same gun. Only Jonathan's fingerprints were found on the handle, ruling out the involvement of anyone else in the attack. Notably, none of the victims, including Lindsay, showed any signs of defensive injuries, suggesting that Jonathan's violent outburst was completely unexpected and uncontrollable, leaving no one time to react or defend themselves. Lindsay, who did not die instantly, bled on the living room floor while Jonathan, upstairs, methodically killed their sleeping children. It is believed that Lindsay heard the commotion but was powerless to intervene. Detectives considered the incident to be highly unusual. Friends and relatives found it hard to believe that a devoted father and loving husband like Jonathan could commit such an atrocity. He had no criminal record, and police had never been called to their home for domestic disturbances. Initially, investigators considered other possibilities, such as robbery or an attack by a stranger, but none of these theories added up. The family was well-liked and had no enemies, and Jonathan seemed incapable of such violence. Investigations cleared Jonathan of any doubts regarding his innocence. Officers interviewed relatives and neighbors to find potential explanations for the tragedy. Those close to the family described them as friendly and problem-free, with Jonathan being a respected community member who avoided criminal behavior. His service record was impeccable, and he was seen as calm and non-confrontational. The suddenness of the incident deeply shocked his relatives, as there had been no warning signs leading up to it. While some considered Jonathan a psychopath, they acknowledged that although disagreements between him and his wife occurred occasionally, they were rare and never involved violence. People struggled to accept his guilt, and as police statements regarding the investigation emerged, confusion set in. The community sought answers to the questions raised by the media, eagerly seeking clarity amidst the turmoil. On the day of the tragedy, Candy's family did not reach out to relatives or friends. They spent time together just once, going to the store for groceries, after which the older children left home to meet their friends. Nevertheless, they all reunited in the evening. The youngest child was unaware of any issues. It felt like a regular day. Jonathan remained calm and did not show any signs of anger. An alarming piece of information came from Michael Buru, a neighbor of the Andy family, who revealed that Jonathan had often helped him with construction and household tasks before the tragedy. They maintained a close relationship and even talked about personal matters. Michael mentioned that Jonathan once confided in him about his struggles, admitting he was dealing with depression and was taking medication prescribed by a doctor. However, Jonathan suggested that he had overcome his illness and that his depression had improved. He claimed to feel fine and had no lingering negativity toward his spouse, attributing his previous unhappiness to his mental state. After that conversation, no one heard him mention a relapse. There were no incidents indicating a return of his depressive symptoms. Investigators reviewed Jonathan's medical records but found nothing new. He had not sought help from psychiatrists or psychologists in recent times. If there had been any changes in Jonathan's condition, they would likely have been noticeable in his behavior. However, the investigation hit a dead end because no one reported anything suspicious. Some family members were aware of Jonathan's past depression, which had been resolved years ago, but they expressed no concern about his current state. Jonathan's mother mentioned that he had quickly overcome his illness and that his depression had not negatively impacted family relationships. Rather, his wife had supported him throughout. People close to Candy's family did not perceive Jonathan's struggles as serious. After overcoming his depression, he seemed to be part of a normal, happy family. The detectives found no additional leads. Was it possible that Jonathan experienced a resurgence of depression? If so, was he keeping it hidden? This was the only potential explanation for what had happened and could provide a motive. However, psychiatrists noted that it would be very difficult to hide such a condition given their active social life. Lindsay and Jonathan regularly spent time with their children, enjoying a vibrant lifestyle filled with barbecues and social gatherings. Their last barbecue event took place on Saturday, April 20th, at Michael's house, where neither Jonathan nor his wife displayed any signs of conflict. What occurred in their home did not align with the existing narrative. More information was needed, but it was lacking. There was hope that insights from mobile phones and computers could reveal important clues. There was a suspicion that jealousy might have played a role in the murder. However, even this line of investigation yielded little. The initial examination revealed no significant findings. Jonathan and his wife communicated regularly on social media, but their conversations appeared to be friendly, without any signs of intrigue or infidelity. Consequently, any theories about betrayal had to be set aside until a thorough analysis of their correspondence could be conducted. Additionally, Lindsay and Jonathan conducted routine searches online, but nothing concerning emerged. The main witness for the police in the case was a 10-year-old boy who, for unknown reasons, had been taken in by his maternal relatives. Many compassionate individuals wanted to help him deal with his trauma, leading to the creation of a fund aimed at raising $100,000 for his support. By the fall of 2024, the fund had already collected over $74,000, and donations were still pouring in. During the spring, the boy attracted attention not only from those offering emotional and financial support but also from law enforcement officers conducting investigations. The police did not speak to him immediately, recognizing that he was in shock and struggling to cope with his traumatic experience. Despite his young age, he was very aware of the horrific event that had claimed the lives of his loved ones. Initially, the boy had trouble sleeping, often waking up screaming and in tears. Multiple psychologists worked with him after he once expressed that he did not want to live. His relatives rallied around him, helping to ease the effects of his severe trauma, but he still faced many challenges ahead. Experts concluded that the boy could meet with the police to provide them with important information, so a child psychologist was brought in to ensure he felt safe and comfortable during the conversation. The psychologist collaborated with investigators to create a list of topics that would be least traumatic for the child. However, despite their efforts, what the boy shared mirrored what others familiar with his family had reported. He struggled to understand why his father had committed such a violent act. He recalled hearing his parents arguing before bedtime, but he could not comprehend the details. A fan was running in the room, drowning out the sounds of the argument, and eventually, he fell asleep, unaware of the tragedy that was unfolding. The boy also confirmed that Jonathan was never cruel or aggressive. He had never hurt his children or his wife, Lindsay. Detectives wanted to know why no one else reacted to the shooting that began inside the house. The other children must have heard their mother's screams, yet they were fast asleep and were shot during the night. It seemed as though fate was on the side of evil. Jonathan used a small-caliber pistol, which is relatively quiet, and forensic experts suggested this might explain why neighbors didn't notice anything during such a quiet time of day. However, it was puzzling that none of the children in the house woke up or heard anything until it was too late. The younger child mentioned that fans were running in every room, which might have muffled the sounds of the shots. Despite the police's efforts, they could not gather new information from the child. The detectives had to ask him some uncomfortable questions regarding the incident, the positions of the bodies, and the bloodshed. Eventually, the boy became anxious and began to cry. The child psychologist decided to halt the questioning to prevent further distress for the boy, leaving the detectives without any new leads. Relatives reported that after meeting with the police, the boy became even more anxious. Psychologists were worried about how to help him deal with this new trauma, as he had just begun to recover from his previous experiences. The police's questioning raised feelings of fear, despair, and helplessness once again. Consequently, they decided not to push him further and to avoid drawing media attention to him. Journalists, being less sensitive, made it more challenging for the boy to maintain his privacy. However, through collective efforts, they managed to secure confidentiality for him. Despite the presence of an expert during the police interview with the boy, it appeared to have a detrimental effect on him. During this time, he stayed with his aunt, who became his official guardian. It is expected that once the fund raises enough money, she will receive financial support to help her nephew address his mental health issues. He continues to suffer from frequent panic attacks, disrupted sleep, and nightmares that have not improved. His aunt believes that the funds should not only cover rehabilitation but also ensure that he can pursue an education and rebuild his life. While this support may seem like a weak consolation and cannot bring back his loved ones, he must navigate a long and challenging recovery with the help of those close to him. Investigators were able to reconstruct the events surrounding the tragedy. It began after an argument between Jonathan and Lindsay escalated, leading him to grab a weapon. He first shot his wife, Lindsay, severely injuring her. She fell to the floor, bleeding but still alive. Jonathan, still armed, was consumed by rage as he entered the children's rooms. He encountered his 18-year-old son, Dylan, and attacked him on the head without hesitation. Dylan was using earplugs, likely to avoid being disturbed by the argument. It's possible that had he not been wearing them, the outcome might have been different. The fatal shot instantly claimed Dylan's life. Jonathan then moved to Ethan's room, where he also attacked his child on the head. The same tragic fate befell his 12-year-old son, Lucas. Only the youngest son, who is 10 years old, survived. The reasons for this remain unclear. Perhaps the father felt pity for the youngest, or he miscalculated and mistakenly overlooked his room. Jonathan went downstairs and returned to the living room. It seemed he understood what had happened, so he ended his life. On April 23rd, a group made up of people who cared for the family and the surviving child came to pay their respects. 39-year-old Lindsay was remembered as a devoted mother and loving wife. As a housewife, she did everything she could to ensure her children were comfortable. 18-year-old Dylan was described as a kind young man who supported his family and was always there for his loved ones. Intelligent and strong, he was a source of support for his friends. The family and friends are heartbroken by this tremendous loss. The youngest victim, 12-year-old Lucas, was unaware that the real threat to his life came from someone close to him. Jonathan will be remembered as a good father and husband, recognized for his ability to uplift spirits and make others laugh. Many struggled to believe that he could commit such an act. Although they acknowledged the evidence against him, they speculated that he was in a state of altered consciousness or psychosis that he couldn't control. At the last press conference, the detectives reported that there can be no doubt that the killer of the Candy family was Jonathan. However, by this time, there was no other information. The only thing the forensic scientist managed to achieve was to cross out any other suspects from the list. Unfortunately, even after several months, nothing new was found out, and the exact reason for the attack remains unknown. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Gemma Mitchell. In June 2021, a devout Christian, Mi Kun Chong, also known as Deborah, disappeared without a trace. Her friends had no idea what to do in this situation, as it was extremely out of character for her, especially since Deborah was vulnerable, a weak woman who could not stand up for herself. Just when the investigation began to gain momentum, a heartbreaking discovery was made. A long series of CCTV footage led the authorities to a cold-blooded killer. This crime story happened quite recently in the UK and tells the story of one of the first women whose sentencing was broadcast live on television. All happened in northwest London, where 67-year-old Deborah lived in her home. She was born and raised in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, but later moved to the Wembley area of the UK in 2004. She lived alone and shared her two-story house with a tenant. Deborah was a parishioner of the Emmanuel Church Center, located about 6 miles from her home. Being a pious woman, she regularly attended church services. Neighbors described Deborah as a cheerful, active, but slightly eccentric older woman who regularly visited her neighbors' houses for tea and company. As Deborah was a believer and a frequent churchgoer, she met many people over the years, which helped her fit in and become part of her local Wembley community. However, not all was well in her life. Unfortunately, Deborah suffered from several mental health issues, was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and acute stress. Fortunately, Deborah had a few people she could rely on, and one of the women she became close to was a 38-year-old named Gemma Mitchell. Gemma previously lived in Australia for 7 years. She was an osteopath who decided to return to the UK in 2015. Her mother and sister lived in Brent, North Wembley, and Gemma stayed with them. Her family was relatively well off. She received a good education and then went to King's College London, where she earned a degree in humanities that included a course in experimental anatomy. During her studies, Gemma proved to be an outstanding medical student and received awards for her knowledge of the human body. Her mother worked for the British Foreign Office, and the family's property in London was valued at approximately $5 million. Unfortunately, the family had recently fallen on hard times, The house was abandoned and in urgent need of repair. Gemma presented herself as a pious person, which was similar to Deborah. They met at the church in August 2020. Unfortunately, Gemma was unable to work as an osteopath in the UK due to the discrepancy between Australian and British practices and found herself essentially without a job. However, to bring Deborah closer, Gemma offered her services as a spiritual healer to help Deborah cope with her mental disorders. It is clear that this could not in any way address Deborah's current problems, as her schizophrenia persisted. By the spring of 2021, she was prescribed stronger medications. The people around her began to notice that Deborah had become more vulnerable and prone to strange behavior. In recent months, she had developed an obsession with Prince Charles and Boris Johnson. It's quite a sad story. Deborah believed that she had a parasocial relationship with Prince Charles and she could talk to him through a video on YouTube. She often set the table for the Prince and Boris Johnson as if they were going to show up at her house at any moment. After sending them several strange letters, she received a referral for psychiatric treatment. After Deborah was admitted to a medical facility for 2 weeks, she was prescribed a new course of medications. Although she did not want to take them, her friends persuaded her to go back. After that, for the most part, Deborah's life returned to normal. Her friends rejoiced with her and looked forward to the summer. However, on June 11, 2021, she suddenly disappeared. On that day, Deborah's lodger began to worry when he could not find her or contact her. Given the current state of her mental health, he knew it would be wise to immediately report this to the authorities. The tenant had seen Deborah the day before, so she could not have been gone for very long. CCTV footage recently confirmed this. The footage showed Deborah walking along Chaplin Road accompanied by her lodger. It is worth noting that Deborah did not walk very well, so if she was on the run, it would have been difficult for her to manage without transportation. As the days passed, it became increasingly obvious that something unusual had happened to Deborah. She had never disappeared like that before. Given her mental health and physical problems, this painted a worrying picture for the authorities. But despite Deborah's silence, some news about her emerged. Gemma informed Deborah's tenant that Deborah had decided to return home to Malaysia to spend time with her family. According to Gemma, Deborah had decided to return home for a year to clear her head. This raised doubts among police officers. To fly to Malaysia, Deborah would have had to present her passport at customs, but there were no stamps recorded on it. No one had seen her leave the house, no local taxi companies had given her a lift, and there was no banking activity indicating that she had used any public transport. Days turned, and there were still no confirmed sightings of Deborah. However, 16 days after she went missing, a discovery was made 200 miles from Wembley. There was a small coastal town called Salcombe. It has beautiful beaches and lovely nature. Many people visit this area as tourists. One woman who came to discover the beauty of new places found much more than she expected. On June 27, 2021, the woman was walking with her family along Bennett Road in Salcombe when she saw a nightmarish scene as she descended the old steps. Nearby lay a decomposing body, and the head was missing. The authorities were immediately called, and upon their arrival, forensic experts found that the body had been dumped along with a church business card and excerpts from the Bible. They soon became known that the body belonged to Mikun Chom. Due to the state of decomposition, an autopsy was unable to determine her exact cause of death. However, it could be said with certainty that she was missing her head. Injuries consistent with an assault were found on her body. Pathologists also believed that Deborah had been dead for about 2 weeks, which was consistent with the time of her disappearance. With the case now classified as a murder, investigators stepped up their efforts to find Deborah's killer, and surprisingly, it didn't take them long to find a potential suspect. CCTV footage from around Deborah's home revealed some very disturbing movements. As officers checked all the friends who knew Deborah, they began to focus on her life. Deborah would periodically hold seances in her garden, and Gemma was often with her. Friends reported that Deborah repeatedly mentioned that Gemma and Jesus healed her. These two women had previously been friends, but at least a week before Deborah disappeared, they may have quarreled over money. This theory was taken into consideration by the officers. Working in the field of osteopathy in Australia, Gemma stated on her professional website that she focused on the genetics of anatomy and the dissection of human cadavers. However, after she returned to England in 2015, she was no longer able to continue her professional life as a result of her circumstances. Gemma worked nowhere else, although she lived with her mother in their old family home in Brent. According to eyewitnesses, the rooms were filled with broken furniture and rubbish. Some rooms were impossible to enter. There were boxes and suitcases, freezers full of food, old mattresses, and building materials everywhere. The kitchen was described as very dirty, with various remains of rotting food on the stove and torn food packaging. The second floor of the house was under renovation, the walls and ceilings were unfinished, there was no roof. The bathroom was stained and in very poor condition. Overall, the whole house looked terrible. Maybe, this house was the cause of the conflict between Deborah and Gemma. According to the collected messages, to renovate Gemma's family home, Deborah was asked to give her 200,000 British pound, and Deborah promised her this. However, after a while, Deborah advised Gemma to sell the house and enjoy the money because life is too short. In a subsequent message, Deborah told Gemma that further repairs and construction would cost a lot of money, which Deborah had nothing for. And from that moment on, the relationship between them deteriorated. Over the next few days, Gemma became more and more persistent and aggressive towards Deborah. On June 8, 2021, Deborah finally got tired of listening to Gemma's complaints and sent her an SMS in which she wrote, "Until you resolve the issue with the house, I do not want you to come to me. I am experiencing stress from your presence." Just 3 days after this, Deborah disappeared. Fortunately, many surveillance cameras filled in all the gaps and allowed law enforcement to create a clear picture of what happened. At 6:15 a.m. on June 11th, Gemma was seen leaving her abandoned house with a large travel suitcase and a backpack on her shoulders. At that time, she was wearing a hat. By 6:40 a.m., Gemma had already changed her clothes, covered her face with a mask, and put her backpack inside the suitcase. In this CCTV footage, Gemma can be seen moving towards Deborah's house. At 7:56 a.m., she took off her hat. However, she could still be seen with the suitcase and mask on her face. Presumably, Deborah was tragically killed in the next 4 hours, because at 12:05 p.m., Gemma was again caught on CCTV, this time carrying 2 suitcases. They both seemed quite heavy as she struggled to carry them. The smaller suitcase most likely contained personal belongings and Deborah's financial documents, which Gemma needed for her further actions, as she intended to use them to create a will. Then, she called a taxi to take her with the 2 suitcases to the right address, but Gemma had to wait for the car for 40 minutes. It was only at 4:15 p.m. that she returned home with a large blue suitcase. Later that evening, Gemma went to a hospital located in the center of town for treatment of a broken finger. She told the doctors that she accidentally pinched her finger in a door. In the following days, in an attempt to cover up the crime, Gemma sent several fraudulent emails to a missing persons charity, and she sent a message to Deborah's tenant to say that the lady of the house had gone to Malaysia to visit relatives. Now, let's fast forward a few days and see that Gemma is on the move again. On June 26 at 8:05 a.m., a CCTV camera across the road from her house recorded Gemma booting up as she had rented a car from a car rental company the night before. On the way to Salcombe, she stopped at a gas station, where a surveillance camera captured her entering the store. After this, Gemma drove another 200 miles southwest to a coastal town. She parked her car near Bennett Road at about 9:12 p.m., where she found a secluded spot to dump the body. She was seen leaving the area 41 minutes later by the same camera. Now, despite being caught on several surveillance cameras, Gemma thought her plan had worked out well. However, there was one part of her carefully thought out scheme that even she couldn't predict. On the way back to London, her rental car had a ruptured inner tube, so Gemma had to stop at a service station and call a repairman to change the tire. This man still remembers his strange encounter with her. She seemed confused and bewildered, insisted that he not climb into the trunk of her car, not to mention putting a tire in there. Additionally, she wanted to keep the old flat tire. The repairman also noted that the car had a strange, heavy, and musty smell, as if someone had been sleeping in it without any ventilation. Unfortunately, he didn't know this at the time, but the car smelled of death when he had her tire fixed. Gemma returned home, where she returned the Volvo and threw the blue suitcase on the roof of a barn belonging to one of the neighbors. The very next day, Deborah's decapitated body was found. The authorities would need another 5 days to find her head. All these clues naturally pointed to Gemma, and the authorities decided to pay a small visit to her 15 minutes before midnight, taking her into custody. Gemma was immediately handcuffed, and the police began to search the house, looking for evidence that could link Gemma to Deborah's murder. As a result, Deborah's personal belongings and financial documents were found, as well as a fake will from Deborah that had been created on a computer. In this will, Gemma named herself and her mother as the beneficiaries of Deborah's entire estate, which was valued at the time at approximately £700,000. Gemma's first official interrogation was held 2 days later and was filled with a whole host of evidence, questions that Gemma did not answer. There are a great many surveillance cameras in modern London, and the fact that Gemma thought her journey with a heavy suitcase containing Deborah's body would go unnoticed did not work. Apparently, Gemma became more open during the interrogation and realized that she had no hope of justifying herself. Thus, during the first and subsequent interrogations, she remained silent, refusing to provide her version of events. Despite her refusal to cooperate with the investigation, the trial of Gemma Mitchell began a year later. On October 11, 2022, Gemma Mitchell not only denied killing Deborah but also refused to testify in her own defense. Her defense team claimed that there was no evidence to support the assertion that Deborah's body had been kept in the suitcase and that no evidence of a struggle was found in Deborah's house. Additionally, no weapon was discovered that could have separated the head from the body. But still, the motive for this crime was alleged to be money. The prosecution claimed that Gemma killed Deborah in order to forge a will and obtain money for home repairs. A notable level of heartlessness was revealed when it was noted that in the period between the murder and her trip with Deborah's body in the suitcase to Salcombe, Gemma went on a date with someone she had met on the internet at the London Zoo. It is worth noting once again that Gemma graduated with a first-class honors degree in the humanities, including a course in experimental anatomy, meaning she had the skills to remove a head from a body, although it is unclear why she did this. The deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict on October 27, 2022. Gemma Mitchell was formally found guilty of the murder of 67-year-old Mi Kun Chom. Gemma's conviction made national headlines. During the sentencing phase of the trial, which was broadcast live on television, Gemma became the first convicted murderer in England and Wales to be sentenced live, as well as being the first woman in the UK to have her sentence filmed. The judge's words to Gemma were quoted as follows. He stated that she had left her residence early in the morning with a large suitcase that, as shown on surveillance camera, was either empty or contained very little. He mentioned that she took public transport to Deborah's residence and stayed there for more than 4 hours. The judge noted that the suitcase she brought home was now clearly full and heavy. He expressed no doubt that she had killed Deborah in her home and concluded that, considering she had not provided any explanation during her interrogations, she had gone to Mi Kun Chom's house that morning with the intent to kill. He remarked that she showed absolutely no remorse and seemed to completely deny what she had done. With the irrefutable evidence against her, the judge announced that Gemma Mitchell was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 34 years, which meant that Gemma would not be eligible for parole until July 10, 2055. During Gemma's trial, a statement from Deborah's sister, who lived in Malaysia, was read to the court. In this statement, the sister wrote, "They still don't understand how she died. This secret will haunt she forever." Gemma never accepted responsibility for Deborah's murder, leaving many questions unanswered. However, for many, the motive appears clear and simple. Deborah was a vulnerable woman seeking help for her mental health problems. She confided in her friend Gemma, even offering her a significant amount of her savings to help with the house. But Gemma's actions constituted a vile and disgusting crime. Since Gemma's conviction, several of her former friends have come forward to share their own experiences with her, revealing that she had always tried to steal money, lured partners, and was a real snake. In the end, the case of Gemma Mitchell stands as a chilling reminder of how trust can be exploited in the most sinister ways. What began as a friendship rooted in shared faith and mutual support spiraled into a calculated act of betrayal, driven by greed and desperation. Deborah's tragic fate not only shattered the lives of those who knew her but also left an indelible mark on the UK's legal history, with Gemma's sentencing etched into public memory through its unprecedented live broadcast. As Gemma serves her life sentence, the unanswered questions surrounding Deborah's final moments linger, a haunting echo of a crime that stripped away a vulnerable woman's life and exposed the dark depths of human nature. Sharon Parker was born and raised in Florida, USA, in a family with several siblings, including 2 older brothers and an older sister. From a young age, she was very active, often attending concerts and participating in social events with her friends. Known for her stylish appearance, she always looked great. In 1976, at the age of 19, Sharon became pregnant and married her longtime boyfriend, whom she had known since school. Their relationship appeared loving and had stood the test of time. After their wedding, they moved to Alabama for her husband's job, where Sharon gave birth to a daughter named Heather. Excited about motherhood, Sharon was eager to be the best mother possible, but her husband did not share her enthusiasm. After Heather's birth, their marriage began to deteriorate. Her husband struggled with the changes, feeling jealous of the time Sharon spent caring for their baby. This ultimately led to their divorce 3 years later. Sharon returned to Florida with Heather, where her family lived. She settled in Fort Myers, close to them, and focused on raising her daughter while working. The father was largely indifferent to the child, so Sharon tried to compensate for the shortcomings in her daughter's life. Initially, Sharon found work as an assistant accountant at a local hospital. Realizing she needed support, she sought a new partner who could be a father figure for Heather and help her have more children. This hope came to fruition when her mother introduced her to Gary Parker, a builder who was studying to become an engineer. Sharon felt an instant connection, describing it as love at first sight. They quickly began a romantic relationship and married a few months later. A year after their wedding, Sharon became pregnant again and gave birth to twin boys, Jacob and Joshua. By that time, Heather was older and eagerly participated in taking care of her brothers, feeling proud to be an older sister and helping with their upbringing, especially when their mother was busy. The Parkers were a happy family. Gary is a good man. He always takes care of his wife's daughter and creates a loving environment for her. After the birth of their twins, Jacob and Joshua, their bond grew even stronger. They seemed to have the perfect family, enjoying barbecues on Sundays and camping in their backyard. It appeared as though they had a bright future ahead, filled with the joys of aging together and raising grandchildren. Unfortunately, their dreams would not come to fruition. Sharon was an excellent mother and a lively young wife who brought warmth and support to the family. As a homemaker, she managed the household while Gary worked to provide for them. They hadn't planned on having more children, but in the fall of 1989, Sharon announced that she was pregnant. They were overjoyed and eagerly anticipated the arrival of their new baby. On March 19, 1990, they welcomed a daughter named Julie. Sharon was thrilled, and Gary shared in her excitement. 10 days after Julie was born, the family planned a big celebration for their relatives and close friends. A large sign hung outside their house to announce that they had had another daughter. By this time, Jacob and Joshua were 6 years old, and Heather was already a high school student. Guests were expected to arrive on the evening of March 29, 1990. As usual, Gary and Sharon woke up that morning, took the kids to school, then Gary went to work while Sharon prepared for the party and cared for Julie. Jacob and Joshua were excited about the evening's events. Once their classes ended, they hurried home. However, as they approached the house, they found it unusually dark inside. Upon entering, they were met with an eerie silence. Their mother, Sharon, always greeted them at this time, often standing by the window to watch for them. She would help them take off their coats as part of their daily routine. So, when she didn't come out to greet them, the boys grew concerned. Initially, they thought she might be unwell and called for her, but there was no response. The boys began searching the house, and one of them soon spotted Sharon sitting motionless in a dark room. He called her name, but she remained silent. As they got closer, they touched her head, causing her to fall to the side. They saw that the right side of her head and face was covered in blood. Alarmed, they called for their baby sister, Julie, but she was nowhere to be found. Feeling distressed, the boys ran out onto the porch, uncertain about what to do next. Around the same time, 14-year-old Heather arrived home from school. She sensed that something was wrong when she saw her frightened twin brothers crying on the porch. They told her that their mother was in the house and hurt. Heather quickly went inside and was horrified to find Sharon, 33, lifeless in a chair with dried blood on her head. Frantically, Heather searched for Julie, but the baby was not there. Confused and panicked, she tried to call emergency services, but the home phone was disconnected. Leaving her brothers on the porch with instructions to stay put, she ran to a neighbor's house to call for help. Initially doubtful, the neighbor ultimately called the police. Soon after, several police cars arrived at their home and began investigating the scene. After Heather called the police, she contacted Gary. He asked for time off from work and went home. Investigators found that the locks and windows were undamaged, suggesting that either Sharon knew her attacker and let them in willingly or that the attacker had a key. Sharon was attacked from behind at close range. The scene was particularly chilling, with her sitting in a chair, her legs crossed and her hands resting on her knees, making it appear as though she was conversing with someone. This posed position suggested that the murderer may have staged it intentionally. There were no signs of a struggle. It was clear that Sharon did not anticipate being shot, as she was facing away from the attacker. An additional concern was the disappearance of her baby, Julie, who had been born just 10 days before the murder. Forensic experts searched the crime scene quickly, knowing that time was of the essence. Every minute that passed increased the urgency to issue media announcements regarding the baby's whereabouts. Unfortunately, they only had a photograph of Julie to share with the public and authorities. When Gary returned to the house, he assisted the police in identifying any missing items. Strangely, they noticed that the holiday poster on the front of the house was gone. Apart from the poster and Julie, nothing of value was taken, even Sharon's wallet was left untouched. This indicated that the murder was not a robbery. The Parker family is known for their kindness and friendliness, with no known enemies or criminal associations. They had no debts or problems, and it did not appear to be a random attack. It seemed to be motivated by personal reasons. The news of Sharon's murder deeply affected the twins, Jacob and Joshua. Until the last moment, they were hopeful that their mother was simply sick and would soon be released from the hospital. During this difficult time, the families of Sharon and Gary came together to support one another and seek justice. To gather more information, the police interviewed the closest neighbors of Sharon and Gary. A neighbor reported seeing a red pickup truck parked near Sharon's garage just before Jacob and Joshua returned home from school. She noticed that the truck was unfamiliar and appeared shabby, though she could not see the license plate. The neighbor then witnessed a woman getting out of the faded red car, carrying a grocery bag. The woman entered Sharon's house calmly, but her face was obscured by a scarf and sunglasses, making the creation of a composite sketch ineffective. This was the only lead the police had, and with no surveillance cameras in the area, it provided little assistance to the investigation. However, they managed to create a basic description of the white, dark-haired woman, which was quickly shared with the media. To gather more details, they used a poster designed for a holiday event. It was essential to talk to those close to Sharon and Gary, as the woman might have been part of a larger criminal scheme. Therefore, detectives were cautious about releasing Gary. He denied any involvement in his wife's murder, and there was no evidence to suggest he had a motive or opportunity, given that he was at work during the incident. Furthermore, Gary cooperated fully with the investigation and did not exhibit any suspicious behavior. Detectives discovered that Gary had a working relationship with a woman named Stephanie. They had taken several business trips together. Gary mentioned that just before the birth of their daughter, Stephanie seemed to become more involved with his family, behaving normally around his wife. Gary recalled that Stephanie visited their home a few days after Sharon was discharged from the hospital. On that day, their eldest daughter, Heather, expressed her dislike for Stephanie's presence, finding it suspicious. The adults dismissed Heather's concerns since she was only 14, but the police found her comment noteworthy. Is it possible that Stephanie kidnapped Julie out of jealousy? Although Gary and Stephanie worked closely together, they insisted there was no romantic involvement. Suspicion arose when a neighbor reported seeing her enter Gary's home, prompting detectives to investigate further. They interviewed Stephanie at the station. She appeared innocent and claimed she was with Gary in the office during the attack. Gary provided a detailed account of his activities on the day of Sharon's death, stating he was working until he received an urgent call from Heather. Witnesses indicated that there were no issues in Gary and Sharon's marriage. Gary described their relationship as harmonious and expressed happiness with their new baby. However, the police questioned why Gary owned a gun for self-defense. This gun was subjected to ballistic testing and did not match the murder weapon. Nevertheless, Gary remained a person of interest in the case. The interrogation lasted about 3 hours and did not raise any alarms. Experts determined that the only injury on Sharon was a gunshot wound to the head, indicating she was killed at close range. No DNA belonging to the killer was found under her fingernails. Meanwhile, a sketch of the suspect, based on a neighbor's description, was widely circulated in the media, resulting in around 100 tips to the police, most of which were deemed unreliable. However, one tip stood out. A woman named Peggy Mason came to the station, confidently claiming to know the identity of the perpetrator based on the police sketch. According to Peggy, she worked as a waitress at a restaurant with a coworker named Craig Kirk, who had a wife named Betty. She recalled that the day before the crime, on March 28, Craig happily told her that Betty was pregnant and could give birth soon. He mentioned this but couldn't provide an exact date for the birth. The day after the tragedy involving Sharon, Craig and Betty had a child together. This could have been a coincidence, but there were many odd details that made Peggy suspicious. A week before the supposed birth, Peggy had seen Betty in the restaurant and noticed that she didn't appear to be pregnant. Her belly seemed fake. By that time, her pregnancy should have exceeded 43 weeks, yet she seemed to be enjoying herself without going to the hospital to induce labor, which seemed strange. When Peggy mentioned these concerns to Craig, he shrugged them off, citing rare cases where pregnancies can behave unusually. However, Peggy felt he was not being truthful. Right after Sharon's murder, Craig and Betty celebrated the birth of their baby, and Peggy, having been invited, attended the party. She was surprised at how quickly Betty and the newborn were discharged from the hospital and returned to normal life. Betty seemed at ease, almost as if she hadn't just given birth. As a mother of 3 herself, Peggy doubted that the child had been born just a day earlier. However, it was hard to confirm her suspicions since Betty kept the baby at a distance from the guests, refusing to show her and attributing her behavior to postpartum depression and medication. Towards the end of the party, Peggy managed to get close enough to the baby to inspect her more closely. She noticed that the baby had short hair, as if it had already been shaved, and the baby did not resemble either of its parents, Betty or Craig. When Peggy shared her suspicions with Betty, the woman became angry and quickly sent all the guests away, particularly upset with Peggy. She questioned where a newborn could come from. After seeing the sketch in the media and hearing about what happened to Sharon, Peggy began to connect the dots and suspected that Betty or Craig might be involved in the case. The detectives became interested in this new lead and decided to investigate Betty. She was previously unknown to the police, having been born in Florida on November 7, 1950. In her first marriage, she had 2 children, but her husband was very abusive. Betty escaped his control, filed for divorce, and gained sole custody of her kids. Unfortunately, she faced many challenges. In 1981, she lost custody of her sons due to her difficult financial situation, and the authorities placed them in foster care. Craig met Betty in 1982, and the year later, they began dating and eventually got married. However, despite their efforts, they remained in poverty and struggled to find happiness. Relatives and friends described their lives as a constant battle for survival. Craig worked long hours in a restaurant, and Betty attempted to find work, but she had dropped out of school due to an early pregnancy, which made it hard for her to secure a good job. They lacked stability and prosperity, but both tried hard to improve their situation. Betty desperately wanted to become a mother. She loved Craig and hoped they could have a child together, but despite trying for many years and even seeking medical help, they were unsuccessful. To fulfill her longing for motherhood, Betty worked in various child-related jobs, such as being a Girl Scout leader and performing as a clown at children's events. During this time, she had a minor legal issue when she forged a check, but she quickly resolved it by paying restitution, which meant there was no official record of the offense. For some time, it seemed that Betty and Craig had accepted that they might never become parents. However, Betty was increasingly anxious about possibly losing Craig to a younger woman who could have children. At the end of the year, she surprised her husband and friends with the exciting news that she was finally pregnant. Betty appeared to be pregnant, as her belly was growing. On the evening of March 29th, she returned home with a girl she named Laura. This seemed unusual because she had been discharged from the hospital right after giving birth. Now their family had grown to 3, and they shared their happy news with loved ones. Detectives went to the restaurant where Craig worked, but he was off that day. They found his home address and went to check if he was there. When Craig opened the door, he was visibly intoxicated and struggled to stay upright. He was confused about why the detectives had come to his home. The house was chaotic and unsanitary. The only clear thing Craig could communicate was that they had recently had a baby. He claimed he was celebrating this event, which was why he was drunk. Betty and baby Laura were also present. Betty confirmed that she had just become a mother and had returned from the medical center a few days prior. She stated that the baby was born in a hospital and that they were discharged immediately due to no complications. However, when questioned, she had difficulty remembering the name and address of the hospital. She eventually said it was a hospital on Michigan Avenue, but the detectives' investigation revealed that there was no maternity ward there. Additionally, she could not present a birth certificate, claiming it was lost in the mess around them. When investigators examined the baby, they noticed that the child did not resemble either Craig or Betty. Despite these inconsistencies, the detectives decided against detaining Craig and Betty, as they wished to handle the situation delicately to avoid escalating tensions. Meanwhile, an unmarked car, driven by a woman possibly connected to the situation, left the house while the police were merely observing the family. Shortly after the police left, Betty began causing trouble by carrying and packing items from the house and loading large boxes into her car. Investigators identified a faded red pickup truck that matched the description provided by a neighbor. Betty then got into the car and drove off, with detectives following her at a distance. They eventually decided to pull her over and inspect the vehicle. Inside, they found numerous boxes but no sign of the child. The detectives returned to Betty's home, where they discovered that the baby was with Craig. They considered this a danger to the child's safety and called in Child Protective Services to have the child taken away. Fortunately, the child was unharmed and was quickly taken to the hospital, where an examination confirmed her well-being. Meanwhile, Craig was brought in for questioning. He was surprised by the situation, expressing disbelief about the events. He claimed to have no knowledge of Sharon's case and believed that Betty couldn't be pregnant by him since their relationship had deteriorated and they hadn't been intimate for years. Craig thought his wife might have had an affair but had accepted the idea of her pregnancy and the baby. However, the investigation revealed a more troubling scenario. Craig possessed a pistol that was taken for analysis because the authorities suspected it might be the weapon used to kill Sharon. Despite this, ballistic tests did not confirm its involvement. Craig provided a crucial lead, mentioning that Betty owned a similar pistol of the same caliber, which was never found, suggesting it had been disposed of by her. After hours of questioning, Craig seemed to genuinely believe that his wife was pregnant with another man's child and showed little interest in knowing more. Medical tests later confirmed that the child was Julie, the kidnapped daughter of Sharon and Gary. During her interrogation, Betty was asked if she recognized Sharon Parker. She replied that she had seen Sharon on television and then confessed to killing Sharon. Betty met Sharon and her twins, Jacob and Joshua, while enjoying a day at the mall. They struck up a conversation, and during their chat, Betty revealed that she had recently experienced a miscarriage, a shared concern that connected her to Sharon. Betty mentioned that she was pregnant again and was seeking support. The police confirmed that Betty had indeed become pregnant in early 1989 but had suffered a miscarriage shortly after, which was likely devastating for her. Her marriage was struggling, and she was desperately trying to keep her husband, motivated by a strong desire for a child. Feeling a bond, they exchanged phone numbers before parting ways. Later, Betty learned that Sharon had given birth to a baby girl. At that time, newspapers published the names of newborns, including the parents' contact information, making it easy for friends and family to send congratulations. This information helped Betty locate the Parkers' residence. She claimed she simply wanted to visit Sharon and congratulate her on the arrival of her new baby. When Betty arrived, Sharon recognized her and expressed joy. She handed Betty some money to buy groceries, which is why a neighbor saw Betty carrying a grocery bag near Sharon's house. However, when Betty entered the home and handed Sharon the groceries, the gun she carried for self-defense accidentally discharged, killing Sharon instantly. Betty stated she was in shock and initially considered fleeing but couldn't abandon the baby out of concern for the child's safety. She decided to take the baby with her, genuinely believing it was an accident and insisting that she should be released from custody. Naturally, Betty was arrested. Her account did not align with the crime scene or the reconstructed events. Soon after, she ceased cooperating with investigators and requested a lawyer. During a search of her home, authorities discovered numerous newspaper clippings featuring the names of newborns, specifically girls, indicating her troubling obsession with female infants. The investigation revealed that Betty had met some of these families, frequently introducing herself to medical professionals. However, her odd behavior raised suspicions, leading some to confront her and ultimately ask her to leave. Notably, prior to Sharon's case, she had not brought a firearm, which proved critical to the tragic outcome. In 1991, Betty's trial commenced. The prosecution charged her with first-degree murder and kidnapping. Betty maintained that the shooting was an accident and declared her innocence. She attempted to portray her actions regarding the child in a positive light within her narrative, but no one believed her. After just 30 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Betty Kirk guilty and sentenced her to life in prison, though she would be eligible for parole at the age of 103. It is unlikely she will ever be free again. The baby, Julie, was returned to her father, Gary Parker, and grew up in a loving home surrounded by her siblings. Gary committed himself to raising his children well, providing them with education and parental love. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Gemma Mitchell. In June 2021, a devout Christian, Mi Kun Chong, also known as Deborah, disappeared without a trace. Her friends had no idea what to do in this situation, as it was extremely out of character for her, especially since Deborah was vulnerable, a weak woman who could not stand up for herself. Just when the investigation began to gain momentum, a heartbreaking discovery was made. A long series of CCTV footage led the authorities to a cold-blooded killer. This crime story happened quite recently in the UK and tells the story of one of the first women whose sentencing was broadcast live on television. All happened in northwest London, where 67-year-old Deborah lived in her home. She was born and raised in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, but later moved to the Wembley area of the UK in 2004. She lived alone and shared her two-story house with a tenant. Deborah was a parishioner of the Emmanuel Church Center, located about 6 miles from her home. Being a pious woman, she regularly attended church services. Neighbors described Deborah as a cheerful, active, but slightly eccentric older woman who regularly visited her neighbors' houses for tea and company. As Deborah was a believer and a frequent churchgoer, she met many people over the years, which helped her fit in and become part of her local Wembley community. However, not all was well in her life. Unfortunately, Deborah suffered from several mental health issues, was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and acute stress. Fortunately, Deborah had a few people she could rely on, and one of the women she became close to was a 38-year-old named Gemma Mitchell. Gemma previously lived in Australia for 7 years. She was an osteopath who decided to return to the UK in 2015. Her mother and sister lived in Brent, North Wembley, and Gemma stayed with them. Her family was relatively well off. She received a good education and then went to King's College London, where she earned a degree in humanities that included a course in experimental anatomy. During her studies, Gemma proved to be an outstanding medical student and received awards for her knowledge of the human body. Her mother worked for the British Foreign Office, and the family's property in London was valued at approximately $5 million. Unfortunately, the family had recently fallen on hard times. The house was abandoned and in urgent need of repair. Gemma presented herself as a pious person, which was similar to Deborah. They met at the church in August 2020. Unfortunately, Gemma was unable to work as an osteopath in the UK due to the discrepancy between Australian and British practices and found herself essentially without a job. However, to bring Deborah closer, Gemma offered her services as a spiritual healer to help Deborah cope with her mental disorders. It is clear that this could not in any way address Deborah's current problems, as her schizophrenia persisted. By the spring of 2021, she was prescribed stronger medications. The people around her began to notice that Deborah had become more vulnerable and prone to strange behavior. In recent months, she had developed an obsession with Prince Charles and Boris Johnson. It's quite a sad story. Deborah believed that she had a parasocial relationship with Prince Charles and she could talk to him through a video on YouTube. She often set the table for the Prince and Boris Johnson as if they were going to show up at her house at any moment. After sending them several strange letters, she received a referral for psychiatric treatment. After Deborah was admitted to a medical facility for 2 weeks, she was prescribed a new course of medications. Although she did not want to take them, her friends persuaded her to go back. After that, for the most part, Deborah's life returned to normal. Her friends rejoiced with her and looked forward to the summer. However, on June 11, 2021, she suddenly disappeared. On that day, Deborah's lodger began to worry when he could not find her or contact her. Given the current state of her mental health, he knew it would be wise to immediately report this to the authorities. The tenant had seen Deborah the day before, so she could not have been gone for very long. CCTV footage recently confirmed this. The footage showed Deborah walking along Chaplin Road accompanied by her lodger. It is worth noting that Deborah did not walk very well, so if she was on the run, it would have been difficult for her to manage without transportation. As the days passed, it became increasingly obvious that something unusual had happened to Deborah. She had never disappeared like that before. Given her mental health and physical problems, this painted a worrying picture for the authorities. But despite Deborah's silence, some news about her emerged. Gemma informed Deborah's tenant that Deborah had decided to return home to Malaysia to spend time with her family. According to Gemma, Deborah had decided to return home for a year to clear her head. This raised doubts among police officers. To fly to Malaysia, Deborah would have had to present her passport at customs, but there were no stamps recorded on it. No one had seen her leave the house, no local taxi companies had given her a lift, and there was no banking activity indicating that she had used any public transport. Days turned, and there were still no confirmed sightings of Deborah. However, 16 days after she went missing, a discovery was made 200 miles from Wembley. There was a small coastal town called Salcombe. It has beautiful beaches and lovely nature. Many people visit this area as tourists. One woman who came to discover the beauty of new places found much more than she expected. On June 27, 2021, the woman was walking with her family along Bennett Road in Salcombe when she saw a nightmarish scene as she descended the old steps. Nearby lay a decomposing body, and the head was missing. The authorities were immediately called, and upon their arrival, forensic experts found that the body had been dumped along with a church business card and excerpts from the Bible. They soon became known that the body belonged to Mikun Chom. Due to the state of decomposition, an autopsy was unable to determine her exact cause of death. However, it could be said with certainty that she was missing her head. Injuries consistent with an assault were found on her body. Pathologists also believed that Deborah had been dead for about 2 weeks, which was consistent with the time of her disappearance. With the case now classified as a murder, investigators stepped up their efforts to find Deborah's killer, and surprisingly, it didn't take them long to find a potential suspect. CCTV footage from around Deborah's home revealed some very disturbing movements. As officers checked all the friends who knew Deborah, they began to focus on her life. Deborah would periodically hold seances in her garden, and Gemma was often with her. Friends reported that Deborah repeatedly mentioned that Gemma and Jesus healed her. These two women had previously been friends, but at least a week before Deborah disappeared, they may have quarreled over money. This theory was taken into consideration by the officers. Working in the field of osteopathy in Australia, Gemma stated on her professional website that she focused on the genetics of anatomy and the dissection of human cadavers. However, after she returned to England in 2015, she was no longer able to continue her professional life as a result of her circumstances. Gemma worked nowhere else, although she lived with her mother in their old family home in Brent. According to eyewitnesses, the rooms were filled with broken furniture and rubbish. Some rooms were impossible to enter. There were boxes and suitcases, freezers full of food, old mattresses, and building materials everywhere. The kitchen was described as very dirty, with various remains of rotting food on the stove and torn food packaging. The second floor of the house was under renovation, the walls and ceilings were unfinished, there was no roof. The bathroom was stained and in very poor condition. Overall, the whole house looked terrible. Maybe, this house was the cause of the conflict between Deborah and Gemma. According to the collected messages, to renovate Gemma's family home, Deborah was asked to give her 200,000 British pound, and Deborah promised her this. However, after a while, Deborah advised Gemma to sell the house and enjoy the money because life is too short. In a subsequent message, Deborah told Gemma that further repairs and construction would cost a lot of money, which Deborah had nothing for. And from that moment on, the relationship between them deteriorated. Over the next few days, Gemma became more and more persistent and aggressive towards Deborah. On June 8, 2021, Deborah finally got tired of listening to Gemma's complaints and sent her an SMS in which she wrote, "Until you resolve the issue with the house, I do not want you to come to me. I am experiencing stress from your presence." Just 3 days after this, Deborah disappeared. Fortunately, many surveillance cameras filled in all the gaps and allowed law enforcement to create a clear picture of what happened. At 6:15 a.m. on June 11th, Gemma was seen leaving her abandoned house with a large travel suitcase and a backpack on her shoulders. At that time, she was wearing a hat. By 6:40 a.m., Gemma had already changed her clothes, covered her face with a mask, and put her backpack inside the suitcase. In this CCTV footage, Gemma can be seen moving towards Deborah's house. At 7:56 a.m., she took off her hat. However, she could still be seen with the suitcase and mask on her face. Presumably, Deborah was tragically killed in the next 4 hours, because at 12:05 p.m., Gemma was again caught on CCTV, this time carrying 2 suitcases. They both seemed quite heavy as she struggled to carry them. The smaller suitcase most likely contained personal belongings and Deborah's financial documents, which Gemma needed for her further actions, as she intended to use them to create a will. Then, she called a taxi to take her with the 2 suitcases to the right address, but Gemma had to wait for the car for 40 minutes. It was only at 4:15 p.m. that she returned home with a large blue suitcase. Later that evening, Gemma went to a hospital located in the center of town for treatment of a broken finger. She told the doctors that she accidentally pinched her finger in a door. In the following days, in an attempt to cover up the crime, Gemma sent several fraudulent emails to a missing persons charity, and she sent a message to Deborah's tenant to say that the lady of the house had gone to Malaysia to visit relatives. Now, let's fast forward a few days and see that Gemma is on the move again. On June 26 at 8:05 a.m., a CCTV camera across the road from her house recorded Gemma booting up as she had rented a car from a car rental company the night before. On the way to Salcombe, she stopped at a gas station, where a surveillance camera captured her entering the store. After this, Gemma drove another 200 miles southwest to a coastal town. She parked her car near Bennett Road at about 9:12 p.m., where she found a secluded spot to dump the body. She was seen leaving the area 41 minutes later by the same camera. Now, despite being caught on several surveillance cameras, Gemma thought her plan had worked out well. However, there was one part of her carefully thought out scheme that even she couldn't predict. On the way back to London, her rental car had a ruptured inner tube, so Gemma had to stop at a service station and call a repairman to change the tire. This man still remembers his strange encounter with her. She seemed confused and bewildered, insisted that he not climb into the trunk of her car, not to mention putting a tire in there. Additionally, she wanted to keep the old flat tire. The repairman also noted that the car had a strange, heavy, and musty smell, as if someone had been sleeping in it without any ventilation. Unfortunately, he didn't know this at the time, but the car smelled of death when he had her tire fixed. Gemma returned home, where she returned the Volvo and threw the blue suitcase on the roof of a barn belonging to one of the neighbors. The very next day, Deborah's decapitated body was found. The authorities would need another 5 days to find her head. All these clues naturally pointed to Gemma, and the authorities decided to pay a small visit to her 15 minutes before midnight, taking her into custody. Gemma was immediately handcuffed, and the police began to search the house, looking for evidence that could link Gemma to Deborah's murder. As a result, Deborah's personal belongings and financial documents were found, as well as a fake will from Deborah that had been created on a computer. In this will, Gemma named herself and her mother as the beneficiaries of Deborah's entire estate, which was valued at the time at approximately £700,000. Gemma's first official interrogation was held 2 days later and was filled with a whole host of evidence, questions that Gemma did not answer. There are a great many surveillance cameras in modern London, and the fact that Gemma thought her journey with a heavy suitcase containing Deborah's body would go unnoticed did not work. Apparently, Gemma became more open during the interrogation and realized that she had no hope of justifying herself. Thus, during the first and subsequent interrogations, she remained silent, refusing to provide her version of events. Despite her refusal to cooperate with the investigation, the trial of Gemma Mitchell began a year later. On October 11, 2022, Gemma Mitchell not only denied killing Deborah but also refused to testify in her own defense. Her defense team claimed that there was no evidence to support the assertion that Deborah's body had been kept in the suitcase and that no evidence of a struggle was found in Deborah's house. Additionally, no weapon was discovered that could have separated the head from the body. But still, the motive for this crime was alleged to be money. The prosecution claimed that Gemma killed Deborah in order to forge a will and obtain money for home repairs. A notable level of heartlessness was revealed when it was noted that in the period between the murder and her trip with Deborah's body in the suitcase to Salcombe, Gemma went on a date with someone she had met on the internet at the London Zoo. It is worth noting once again that Gemma graduated with a first-class honors degree in the humanities, including a course in experimental anatomy, meaning she had the skills to remove a head from a body, although it is unclear why she did this. The deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict on October 27, 2022. Gemma Mitchell was formally found guilty of the murder of 67-year-old Mi Kun Chom. Gemma's conviction made national headlines. During the sentencing phase of the trial, which was broadcast live on television, Gemma became the first convicted murderer in England and Wales to be sentenced live, as well as being the first woman in the UK to have her sentence filmed. The judge's words to Gemma were quoted as follows. He stated that she had left her residence early in the morning with a large suitcase that, as shown on surveillance camera, was either empty or contained very little. He mentioned that she took public transport to Deborah's residence and stayed there for more than 4 hours. The judge noted that the suitcase she brought home was now clearly full and heavy. He expressed no doubt that she had killed Deborah in her home and concluded that, considering she had not provided any explanation during her interrogations, she had gone to Mi Kun Chom's house that morning with the intent to kill. He remarked that she showed absolutely no remorse and seemed to completely deny what she had done. With the irrefutable evidence against her, the judge announced that Gemma Mitchell was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 34 years, which meant that Gemma would not be eligible for parole until July 10, 2055. During Gemma's trial, a statement from Deborah's sister, who lived in Malaysia, was read to the court. In this statement, the sister wrote, "They still don't understand how she died. This secret will haunt she forever." Gemma never accepted responsibility for Deborah's murder, leaving many questions unanswered. However, for many, the motive appears clear and simple. Deborah was a vulnerable woman seeking help for her mental health problems. She confided in her friend Gemma, even offering her a significant amount of her savings to help with the house. But Gemma's actions constituted a vile and disgusting crime. Since Gemma's conviction, several of her former friends have come forward to share their own experiences with her, revealing that she had always tried to steal money, lured partners, and was a real snake. In the end, the case of Gemma Mitchell stands as a chilling reminder of how trust can be exploited in the most sinister ways. What began as a friendship rooted in shared faith and mutual support spiraled into a calculated act of betrayal, driven by greed and desperation. Deborah's tragic fate not only shattered the lives of those who knew her but also left an indelible mark on the UK's legal history, with Gemma's sentencing etched into public memory through its unprecedented live broadcast. As Gemma serves her life sentence, the unanswered questions surrounding Deborah's final moments linger, a haunting echo of a crime that stripped away a vulnerable woman's life and exposed the dark depths of human nature.
When the police arrived at the house, they immediately sensed something was wrong. There were no broken windows or signs of forced entry. A quiet bedroom with a man lying on the floor in his pajamas. His glasses sat neatly on the nightstand. A kitchen knife and a cricket bat were nearby, and the door was tied shut with a bathrobe belt. The oddest detail was that his girlfriend, Jane Andrews, was missing. What happened that night, and where could Jane be? Jane Dawn Elizabeth Andrews was born on April 1st, 1967 in Cleethorpes, Lincolnshire, England. Due to financial difficulties, her family had to move to Grimsby, which was not their preferred choice. Her father, a joiner, had trouble finding steady work and often switched between temporary jobs, leaving the family without consistent support. Jane's mother managed the household by first working in social care and later as a teaching assistant. Although her job provided a stable income, it was not sufficient to meet their needs. Eventually, the family was forced to move into a much smaller home that lacked a bathroom, having only an outdoor toilet. Their situation was extremely challenging. They frequently searched the house for spare coins to buy a loaf of bread. Despite their struggles, they kept their difficulties to themselves, and their relatives were unaware of how tough their circumstances truly were. Jane was a bright and curious child. Her teachers recognized her potential. However, during her teenage years, she faced mental health challenges, including depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. As a result, her grades fell, and she started skipping school. When her mother discovered this, Jane felt ashamed. She didn't intend to rebel, but simply couldn't handle her situation. She began to feel hopeless and as though her life lacked purpose. Eventually, in a moment of profound despair, Jane tried to take her own life by ingesting a large number of pills. Although she survived, her mental health continued to worsen. As Jane got older, she found herself turning to brief relationships for comfort. At 17, she became pregnant, but realized that the father wasn't committed, and she felt unprepared to raise a child on her own. So, she made the tough decision to terminate the pregnancy. Initially, it seemed like the right choice, but it left her with lingering feelings of regret. To move forward, she enrolled in a fashion design program in high school. After graduating, she started working as a designer for children's clothing at a British retail chain. Although the job wasn't glamorous, it was a step in the right direction. However, she still lived with her parents in Grimsby, and she was unhappy there. Jane yearned for a better life. She spent hours perusing fashion magazines, envisioning herself in those stunning outfits adorned with designer jewelry. She wasn't just dreaming of success. She was truly desperate for a change and a way to escape. In 1988, 21-year-old Jane saw a job advertisement in a magazine. A busy mother needed a dresser to assist her with wardrobe and styling. Assuming the mother was wealthy, Jane applied, unaware that this would lead her to encounter royalty. 6 months later, Jane was invited for an interview and found herself meeting Sarah, the Duchess of York and wife of Prince Andrew. They connected well, and within a week, Jane received a life-changing letter confirming she got the job. Jane's journey took her from Grimsby to Buckingham Palace, entering a new world. Her starting salary was 17,000 British pound a year, modest for royal standards. But what truly mattered to Jane was the privilege of access. She traveled worldwide with Sarah, mingled with aristocrats, and rapidly began to transform herself. She took elocution lessons to soften her northern accent and adopted new clothes, mannerisms, and even a different identity. She had a goal. Instead of just working for the wealthy, she wanted to become wealthy herself. She dreamed of marrying into money to escape her previous life. In April 1989, she met Christopher Dunn Butler, a butler who seemed to embody her dreams. He was 20 years older than her, a senior director at IBM, wealthy, sophisticated, and powerful, the perfect man for Jane. However, he was already in a relationship. Undeterred, Jane and Christopher began a secret affair, but Jane wanted more than secrecy. She offered Christopher an ultimatum. He had to choose between her and his current partner. He chose her, and soon their relationship was public. Within a year, they were engaged, and they married in August. What started as a fairy tale quickly turned sour. There was no passion or chemistry. They felt more like friends than romantic partners. Jane became restless again. She began having affairs one after the other, leading to the collapse of her marriage in 1994. The divorce didn't upset her. She had already met someone new, Dimitri Horn, a Greek businessman and son of a shipping magnate. They were introduced by the Duchess of York at another elegant event. Jane and Dimitri quickly became inseparable, enjoying fine dining, traveling, and living the romantic life she had always dreamed of. However, problems soon arose. Jane's jealousy resurfaced, growing increasingly intense. If Dimitri glanced at another woman, she noticed. If he spoke to one, she reacted with controlling and possessive behavior. Dimitri eventually reached his breaking point and ended the relationship. In a fit of rage, Jane didn't just leave, she vandalized his apartment, slashed his clothes, and destroyed his belongings in a turbulent frenzy. When things calmed down, she resorted to taking pills again. But this time, the overdose wasn't fatal. She woke up feeling broken and alone. A year later, in 1997, Jane faced another setback. After 9 years of working with the Duchess of York, she was let go. The official reason was budget cuts. With Sarah now divorced from Prince Andrew, she could no longer afford the same staff. However, rumors suggested a different story. Sarah had reportedly started dating an Italian businessman and was concerned that Jane might catch his interest. Although there was no concrete evidence, the fear of betrayal lingered. Jane felt deeply hurt. She had dedicated herself to her role and rebuilt her identity, only to be dismissed. One thing was clear. Though she was determined not to return to Grimsby, she would remain in London. She started a new job managing the public image of a hotel in London, but just 2 months later, she was let go due to her lack of experience, which was apparent to everyone. Soon after, she found another opportunity at a high-end jewelry store in the city center. Jane took the job, not for the paycheck, but for the wealthy and influential clients she would meet. She was eager to network again. In 1998, a friend set her up on a blind date with a man named Thomas Ashley Cressman. Jane was 31 and Thomas was 37. From their first meeting, Jane was enchanted by him. He was tall, attractive, and successful, everything she had ever hoped for. Thomas came from an American family that had moved to the UK. His father was a self-made multimillionaire who built a successful chain of car dealerships across Europe. Thomas enjoyed a life of privilege, attending private schools and studying at a university in the United States, which was a stark contrast to Jane's childhood, spent with outdoor toilets and searching for coins. Thomas loved cars, especially sports cars. He enjoyed working on engines, often spending hours building and modifying them. He was charming, enthusiastic, and attentive. During this time, he fell for Jane. While she was in Greece with friends, Thomas called her every day. When she came back, he welcomed her with a large bouquet of red roses. They quickly became inseparable. Within 3 months, Jane moved into Thomas's house. but old issues reappeared. Jane struggled with seeing Thomas interact with other women. She would hover, interrupt conversations, and pull him away. Even during innocent discussions, she needed to be the sole focus of his attention, and the possessiveness that had harmed her previous relationships returned. From the very start, Jane Andrews had one clear goal: to become Jane Cressman. She believed that Thomas was the perfect man for her: wealthy, handsome, romantic, and ideally suited to be her future husband. However, Thomas was in no hurry to commit, and Jane was quickly losing her patience. She started dropping hints in public, hoping that the pressure would encourage him to propose, but Thomas remained silent. Why was he hesitant? Was he having second thoughts? Or was there someone else Jane needed answers? So she decided to check his emails. There, she discovered her worst fear: messages exchanged with a woman he had met on a flight to the United States. She didn't know how serious their relationship was, but in Jane's mind, it could only mean one thing: he was cheating. That night, Jane confronted Thomas about the situation. He tried to reassure her that he had only met the woman once, and the emails didn't mean anything. However, Jane was extremely angry and humiliated, demanding to know the truth. To ease her frustration, Thomas suggested they take a trip to Italy. This trip was planned around a motorboat show that he couldn't afford to miss. After Italy, they would continue to the French Riviera, where his family had a vacation home. Jane agreed, secretly hoping that this trip would be special. As their 2-year anniversary approaches, she wished that, in the romantic setting of the Riviera, Thomas would finally propose. However, when they arrived, they were joined by friends. They spent their days enjoying boating, attending shows, and having fun. But Jane was still waiting for the proposal she desired. After days without any sign of a ring, she finally asked Thomas directly about their future. His response was disheartening. He said there would be no engagement, not now or ever, and he was starting to have doubts about their relationship. Jane was shocked. The reality she had built in her mind collapsed in an instant. They were arguing loudly, frustrated. She called a friend to express her feelings in detail, speaking loudly so others could hear her. Even during the car ride to the airport with Thomas, his mother, and his nephew, she continued to vent on the phone. The atmosphere was tense, but Jane was indifferent to everyone else's discomfort. On Sunday, September 17, 2000, 2 days after their return to London, Thomas's mother tried to call him. There was no answer. She kept calling, but still no response. She assumed Thomas and Jane were out, perhaps having lunch, or just needed some time apart. However, when Thomas still hadn't called by the next day, his mother's worry transformed into fear. By Monday afternoon, she decided to contact his workplace. That's when she truly began to panic. Thomas hadn't shown up for work at all and hadn't sent any messages. This was completely out of character for him. His mother asked one of his coworkers to check on him since the office was just across the street from Thomas's home, and they had a spare key. The employee knocked and rang the bell, but no one answered. He opened the door and called out, receiving only silence. The downstairs area was empty. He then went upstairs and found Thomas lying motionless on the floor, with blood surrounding him. The employee quickly went outside to call emergency services, but it was too late. When the police arrived, they discovered evidence that shocked everyone. A knife, which was missing from the kitchen, had been used to stab Thomas in the chest. Nearby, an abandoned cricket bat was found. Detectives suspected that Thomas had been struck on the head before being stabbed. There were no defensive wounds on his hands, indicating that he had not fought back. He had been attacked while sleeping in his pajamas, and his glasses were on the nightstand. Furthermore, there was no sign of forced entry. There were no broken windows or damaged locks. This indicated that the killer was already inside the house when the attack occurred. A pressing question occupied the minds of all investigators. Where was Jane Andrews? Her car was missing, and her phone was not in use. Was she a victim or the perpetrator? The police released a bulletin asking the public for any information regarding Jane's vehicle. Friends, including Sarah, tried to reach her, but there was no response. Then there was a breakthrough. Her car was seen on a highway west of London, and surveillance footage at a gas station confirmed that Jane had been driving alone. Meanwhile, evidence inside Thomas's home became increasingly incriminating. Handwritten notes were discovered, including one that stated, "Thomas is horrible to me, he treats me badly," and another that questioned, "What have I done?" Even more concerning was the finding of Jane's blood-stained clothes in the hallway, a bathrobe with the belt tied from the bedroom doorknob to the stair railing. If Thomas had survived the initial attack, he would have been trapped and unable to escape. Additionally, someone had taken a shower, as traces of Thomas's blood were found in the drain. This was not a crime of passion. It appeared to be premeditated. Jane Andrews was now missing, and investigators worried she might be trying to leave the country since her passport and credit cards were missing. Suddenly, her phone came to life with messages she was texting friends to ask about Thomas, feigning ignorance. Although her tone seemed relaxed and indifferent, the police remained suspicious. They traced her location through her messages and discovered she was still in England, on her way to Cornwall. Throughout the day, she sent multiple messages, but one friend maintained steady communication with her. That evening, Jane sent a disturbing message. She had taken a large number of pills. An immediate search was launched. Helicopters flew over the highways and countryside. 4 days later, her car was discovered parked in silence. Inside, Jane was found barely conscious, slumped in the back seat. She was taken to the hospital, where doctors pumped her stomach, and once again, she survived. When Jane woke up, she denied any involvement in Thomas's death, claiming she was unaware of what had happened and insisting she didn't kill him. Initially, she suggested that someone had broken into their home, but detectives quickly confirmed there was no evidence of a break-in. Later, she did admit to something, but not to murder. She said it was in self-defense. Jane explained to the investigators that their relationship had been abusive, stating that Thomas had physically assaulted her and that she had hidden a knife under the bed for her own protection because she was terrified of him. She explained that she had never shared her experience of abuse because she felt ashamed. She had never encountered such treatment before. Jane recounted that on the night Thomas died, he attempted to intimate with her, and when she refused, he slapped her, causing her to black out. She claimed she could not remember stabbing him and believed that Thomas was still alive when she left the house. But what truly happened? After returning from the French Riviera, the tension between Jane and Thomas escalated on their first day back and continued into the next morning. The house was filled with yelling. Jane was relentless, screaming and breaking things in Thomas's home. The man who once gave her roses now feared what she might do next. On Saturday, just before noon, Thomas called the police to report a violent argument. He warned the operator that the situation could escalate dangerously for either person involved. However, no officers were dispatched because there was no physical crime, only a heated disagreement. The operator advised them to calm down, but by the time things settled, Thomas had already died. By the end of April 2001, Jane Andrews was on trial at the Old Bailey. She admitted to killing Thomas Cressman but argued it was in self-defense. She portrayed him as abusive, controlling, and violent. But those who knew Thomas did not recognize this image of him. After nearly 12 hours of deliberation, the jury found her guilty. Jane Andrews was sentenced to life in prison for murdering her partner. She appealed the decision, but her appeal was denied. 9 years later, in 2010, Jane was transferred to an open prison, where inmates can leave during the day and return at night. However, one day she failed to return and was missing for 2 days. Eventually, she was found in a hotel just 6 miles away, where she had been meeting her parents. Although there were no penalties for her absence, it negatively affected her parole hearing. As a result, her release was denied in 2012. In 2015, 4 years later, officials determined that Jane was no longer a threat to society. She was granted parole and was released after spending 14 years in prison. Unfortunately, her freedom was short-lived. In 2018, she was arrested again for harassment and spent another year behind bars. When she was released on August 8th of 2019, she moved to Lincolnshire and began a new life working in a supermarket, stocking shelves. Jane experienced a dramatic journey, moving from royal palaces to prison and, ultimately to a life of quiet anonymity. During her time in custody, she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which is characterized by intense emotional fluctuations, impulsive behavior, a profound fear of abandonment, and unstable relationships. Some experts suggest that this condition accounts for her violent outbursts, particularly her difficulty in coping with rejection, which was a significant factor in Thomas's murder. However, her mental health issues did not change the facts of the case, nor did they affect her sentencing. Thomas Cressman was just 39 years old. He had a bright future, a family, and many plans ahead of him. His death was sudden, brutal, and without reason. May we always remember him and let his story serve as a reminder of how fragile love can be, as well as the importance of asking for help when needed. The morning of June 21st, 2016 was scorching, just like most summer days in Riverside County, California. A local motorcyclist was riding along a rural road near Lake Matthews when he pulled off the highway and noticed a motionless figure on the shoulder. A man was lying on his back. His face was partially disfigured, and his clothes were soaked in blood. The nature of the injuries pointed to a violent crime, several stab wounds followed by a shot to the head. There were no signs of a struggle at the scene, nor any indication that the crime had occurred there. Everything suggested that the body had been transported and dumped after the crime. Investigators later identified the victim as 25-year-old Justin Hilbert, a resident of Riverside. On the evening of June 20th, he left the home he shared with his partner, Tanya Rep, and never returned. Their son was just 6 months old at the time. Justin had recently finished a technical training program and had just started a new job. His life seemed to be turning around, but it came to an abrupt end. The investigation immediately hit roadblocks. Justin had no known enemies, no debts, and those close to him reported no ongoing conflicts. Tanya Rep was born in California in the mid-1980s. She grew up in a stable, working-class household, became independent early, from a young age. She demonstrated responsibility and strong ambition. She worked in logistics, was known for her organizational skills, reliability. In the 2000s, Tanya met Jared Bischoff. He appeared mature, dependable, and strong. Their relationship progressed quickly. They married not long after. However, their marriage began to crack under pressure. Tension and power struggles grew more frequent over time. Jared became increasingly controlling and aggressive. He displayed jealousy, exerted emotional pressure, eventually resorted to physical force. Tanya refused to accept that behavior. She began gathering evidence, preparing for a divorce. The process was long and painful. Jared refused to let go, resisted the separation. He tried to maintain influence over her at any cost. Jared served in the U.S. Marine Corps. After leaving the military, he returned to California and struggled to find stable work. He had a determined, persistent character. Outwardly, he seemed calm and dependable, but beneath that facade, there was volatility and a desire for control. He viewed the marriage not simply as a personal relationship, but as his territory, one he would not allow interference in. After the divorce, he couldn't accept that Tanya had moved on. He especially struggled when she began seeing another man. Though he claimed to have come to terms with it verbally, he continued to interfere. He showed up near her home, monitored her activities, applied pressure, and issued threats. He didn't see his behavior as stalking. In his mind, it was about restoring justice and trying to regain lost control. Justin Hilbert lived in Riverside, California. He was just beginning to build his adult life. After years of side gigs and searching, he enrolled in a technical school, graduated, and landed a full-time job maintaining industrial equipment. Justin was calm, avoided conflict. In early 2015, he met Tanya. At the time, she was finalizing the end of a difficult marriage. Their first conversations felt easy, natural. Justin didn't push, didn't rush things, and never made demands. He simply showed up, listened, offered support, and helped when needed. Over time, Tanya and Justin developed a strong bond. They didn't move in together immediately, but they started to spend more time as a couple. With Justin, Tanya felt a sense of safety she hadn't experienced in a long time. When she discovered she was pregnant, Justin responded with calm and support instead of fear. He became more engaged, helping to prepare for the baby. And by early 2016, they were living together. In January, their son was born. He quickly became the focal point of their lives. Justin embraced fatherhood, learning how to swaddle, bottle feed, care for him at night, and take him for walks. Although they weren't legally married, their family and friends saw them as a complete family unit. Justin's parents welcomed Tanya into their lives, and she often spent time with them, creating a warm home environment. Justin had no ties to Jared and was unaware of how deeply Jared was affected by the changes in Tanya's life. All Justin wanted was to create a stable, loving family together. Bailey Sharp, the youngest person in this story, was born in the early 1990s in Seattle to a family involved in law enforcement. As a child, she was energetic, enjoyed science and sports. However, her life took a turn during her teenage years when she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and lupus. The chronic pain and medical limitations significantly impacted her mental health. By the age of 16 or 17, she began using marijuana, progressed to prescription painkillers, and eventually sought out stronger drugs. Despite going through rehabilitation multiple times and experiencing periods of recovery, she faced ongoing relapses. By 2015, her social connections in Seattle had weakened, and her family relationships were strained, prompting her to move to California in search of a fresh start. In California, she struggled with unstable housing and unemployment. She would sometimes stay with acquaintances, frequent bars, and visit low-budget venues. It was at one of these places that she met Jared Bischoff, Tanya's ex-husband. Jared soon became a controlling figure in her life, using her vulnerability and dependence for his own gain, rather than seeking a romantic relationship. On June 20, 2016, the day in Riverside began like any other. Justin was spending time with Tanya and their 6-month-old son. They talked about Justin's early shifts at his new job and made plans for the week. Everything felt peaceful. In the afternoon, Tanya mentioned a strange conversation she had the night before. A woman named Bailey had sent her a message, alleging that Justin was being dishonest and living a double life. Tanya showed the messages to Justin, who read them carefully and firmly stated that they were false. He remained calm and suggested that someone was trying to create tension between them. Justin assured Tanya that he would find out who was behind the messages. He understood why she might doubt him and reassured her of his love and honesty. At around 9 p.m., Justin mentioned that he needed to step out for a little while. He didn't provide many details, but it was typical for him to briefly leave to grab tools, visit a friend, or get some fresh air. He prepared to go without any fuss, kissed his son, told Tanya he would be back soon, and left with his keys. Everything seemed normal at the time. However, hours went by and Justin did not return. Tanya tried texting him and then called, but there was no response. By midnight, his phone was turned off. Worry began to creep in. She stayed up, repeatedly checking messages and calling, hoping to hear from him, but there was silence. Justin had never spent the night away without informing her. At around 8 a.m. on June 21st, Tanya received a short text from Justin's number that simply said, "Don't wait, it's over." There was no greeting and no explanation. The message felt strange and uncharacteristic of Justin. Sensing that something serious had occurred, she quickly texted his mother and called his sister. Unfortunately, no one knew Justin's whereabouts. That morning, Riverside County authorities received a report about a man on a motorcycle who was riding down a rural road near Lake Matthews. He noticed a body lying face up, with clothes soaked in blood. There were no indications of a struggle. A medical examiner later confirmed that the victim died from a gunshot wound to the head, but there were also knife wounds that had occurred beforehand. All evidence pointed to the conclusion that the victim had been attacked elsewhere and then left in that location. The police identified the victim as Justin Hilbert. His earlier disappearance and a previous message now made a chilling connection. After discovering the body, Investigators quickly began their work. The condition of the remains suggested that the crime likely occurred the previous night. Once they confirmed the victim's identity, officers visited the Justin home. Tanya stated that Justin left around 9 p.m. and had not returned since. The police recorded her statement and collected his possessions. They also noted that his dark blue sedan was missing and entered it into the National Database for Missing Vehicles. Upon examining Justin's clothing, they found that several personal items were absent. He usually carried his phone, work badge, and wallet, but none of these were found. It was evident that someone had intentionally tried to cover their tracks. Interviews with Justin's friends and colleagues provided minimal information. No one was aware of any problems or threats. Everyone characterized him as calm. There were no debts, lawsuits, or any clear motive. The case took a turn when investigators examined Tanya's recent messages. One name caught their attention: Bailey. She had reached out to Tanya just before Justin disappeared. A record search revealed Bailey Sharp, who is registered in San Bernardino County but does not have a permanent address. She is a young woman with a history of arrests related to banned substance. Bailey became the first major lead for investigators. There were no records of a job, insurance, lease, driver's license, or vehicle in her name. The only clue was the phone number she texted to Tanya. The police then examined the contacts associated with that number, identifying a man named Jared Bischoff, who is Tanya's ex-husband. There was no clear proof that Bailey and Jared were working together, but the circumstances were troubling. A woman with a questionable past suddenly contacting Tanya. That same phone number had also frequently reached out to Tanya's ex. Suspecting wrongdoing, investigators requested mobile device location data for the night of June 20th to 21st. Bailey's phone showed location pings in southern Riverside, near where Justin's body was eventually discovered. Investigators also examined Bailey's associates. Social workers reported spotting her with different men in parking lots and bars, but their identities were unknown. As a result, the investigators turned their attention to digital records. They found that the IP address used for Bailey's social media logins was the same as the one linked to Jared's account. This raised suspicions within the investigative team about a potential ongoing connection between Bailey and Jared. Although the exact nature of their relationship was unclear, to avoid raising suspicions among potential suspects, the investigators chose to carry out surveillance quietly and continue collecting information. They began by confirming the locations of the suspects and checking if they were together. There was still no direct evidence. Investigators initially overlooked another possibility until they analyzed the messages exchanged between Tanya and Bailey. They became increasingly convinced that these texts were part of a deliberate setup meant to instigate doubt, jealousy, and resentment in Tanya. Bailey suggested that Justin was living a double life, cheating, and portrayed herself as the true victim. However, the messages lacked concrete evidence and details. One notable aspect was the overly polished language. The texts sounded scripted rather than expressing genuine personal distress. This led to a new consideration. Either someone else had composed the messages, or Bailey was not acting independently. Cell phone records indicated that while texting, Bailey was connected to a public Wi-Fi network at a bar in Murrieta. Investigators promptly secured the bar's surveillance footage. The video showed a woman who looked like Bailey sitting in a back corner and using her phone. Beside her was a man who sometimes leaned in to speak with her, pointed at her screen, and then walked away. The poor video quality made it difficult to identify the man. Later, investigators uncovered an important fact. The message Tanya received on the morning of June 21st from Justin's phone was not actually sent by him. By that time, Justin was already dead, and his phone was with Bailey Sharp. This revelation was unsettling. Bailey had intentionally sent that message to create a false assurance, preventing Tanya from panicking and making it appear as if Justin had left willingly. The goal was to calm her down and delay her from contacting the authorities, which was part of a calculated plan to postpone the discovery of the crime and evade law enforcement. The suspects made a critical error by not recognizing how easily digital activity can be tracked today. The way messages were structured, The entry points to their network and the movements of phones all indicated a coordinated plan. Bailey's actions raised further suspicion. Just one day after Justin went missing, she turned off her phone and disappeared. This didn't seem like a reaction of panic. It appeared to be premeditated. Once the police started searching for Bailey Sharp, they struggled to locate her. Her phone was off, and she wasn't sending any messages. The only clue they had came from surveillance footage from a pharmacy in Paris on the evening of June 22nd, about 24 hours after Justin's body was discovered. Bailey was seen on camera alone, wearing a medical mask and a hooded sweatshirt, purchasing pain relievers and bottled water. She used an ID that belonged to someone else. The clerk couldn't remember details, but the cameras recorded everything. After that, she vanished once more. She was declared a wanted person, and local law enforcement agencies were notified. Her photo, aliases, descriptions, and known connections were added to the system. Investigators concluded that if she were merely a witness, she would not be hiding. Her disappearance turned her into a suspect, but there was no concrete evidence linking her to the crime, and no one had presented clear testimony against her. The case relied on circumstantial evidence, coincidences, strange messages, and her unexpected disappearance. Police observed a recurring pattern. In recent weeks, Bailey had been spotted multiple times in Riverside, near a secluded residential complex. Surveillance cameras captured images of her vehicle, followed by footage of another car. It seemed improbable that she could go into hiding on her own. Someone was likely providing her with shelter or accompanying her. A bigger question arose. If Bailey was just the bait, who was truly behind this entire situation? Who orchestrated it all? The answer started to become clear on the morning of June 24th, when the Department of Motor Vehicles provided some information. The second vehicle that was often seen near Bailey was registered to Jared Bischoff. This name had already been mentioned in the case files. Jared is the ex-husband of Tanya, who lives with Justin. Until that point, the police had no reason to link him directly to Justin's disappearance, but now his vehicle had been spotted near the location where the main suspect was hiding. Investigators started looking into Jared's history. He was a former Marine with several years of service and had worked in warehouses, sometimes in private security. Over the past year, he had not maintained a steady job. After divorcing Tanya, he briefly lived with relatives before moving out. Friends of Tanya mentioned that communication between her and Jared had ceased following numerous arguments, controlling behavior, and emotional strain. She felt he was a threat to her safety. After their breakup, Jared became difficult to track down. No one knew where he was living or who he was with. Until Bailey Sharp came into the picture, phone data showed that Bailey had been visiting Riverside regularly for several weeks before the incident. Surveillance footage from that area showed her with a man who closely resembled Jared. This was later confirmed by location data from both Bailey's and Jared's phones, which indicated they were in the same places at the same times. On the night Justin went missing, both phones registered signals from the same area in Riverside where Justin's body was eventually found. Police obtained a warrant to search an apartment believed to be occupied by Jared. Based on his mobile activity, the lease was under a false name. Inside, the place was disorganized, containing leftover food, Bailey's clothing, a backpack, and a knife wrapped in a t-shirt. The knife tested positive for blood, which forensics later identified as belonging to Justin Hilbert. However, Jared was not found at the scene. Neighbors reported seeing him shortly before the incident, sometimes alone and other times with a woman who looked like Bailey. Afterward, both disappeared. Authorities in Riverside County have issued warrants for both suspects. The search now includes banks, phone companies, and traffic cameras. Investigators returned to a bar in Murrieta where Bailey was frequently seen. A bartender remembered her distinctly. She had been there with a tall, quiet man. At the time, he didn't know the man's name, but when shown a photo of Jared, he recognized him right away. The bartender noted that they appeared to be very cautious. They talk about the impending disappearance of a woman. This indicated that the initial target might have been Tanya. Justin's presence became the catalyst for the conflict. Jared, using Bailey, set up a scheme where she sent Tanya false messages suggesting infidelity. This was intended to sow doubt, incite conflict, and potentially push Justin away. On the evening of June 20th, Justin left his home after receiving texts from Bailey, who claimed she wanted to meet and reveal information about the situation. Unbeknownst to Justin, he was heading into a trap. A few days later, investigators found Justin's abandoned car on a secluded road, far from any houses or security cameras. Inside the vehicle, there were bloodstains on the seat, and outside, a partial fingerprint belonging to Danny Serrano, a man with a criminal record for assault and theft. At that time, Danny was in custody for another charge, but it was confirmed that he was free when Justin went missing. Investigators interviewed Danny at the detention center. Although he denied being involved in the incident, his statements were inconsistent. The police had his photo and showed it to the bartender, who recognized Danny immediately. He remembered seeing Danny with another man who seemed nervous and agitated. Though Danny hadn't been drinking much, he changed clothes in the restroom and threw something in the trash as he left. His testimony supported investigators' suspicions that a third person was involved. Justin's phone was later found in a dumpster near where his car was discovered. Although the phone was damaged, forensic experts managed to retrieve the call logs and text messages. These records indicated that, in the hours leading up to his death, Justin received texts from Bailey's number, followed by a phone call that prompted him to leave his home. In early July, investigators took an interest in a small motel in Arizona where a man and woman matching the descriptions of Jared and Bailey had stayed. The motel manager remembered them as quiet guests who paid in cash and requested not to be disturbed. After their stay, the motel's shower had been thoroughly cleaned, but traces of blood were found in the drain. On July 23, 2016, near an abandoned hangar in the desert, the body of a woman was discovered. It was Bailey Sharp. She had died from multiple stab wounds, and no personal items, identification, or phone were found with her. Additionally, Jared's fingerprints were found on a plastic bag near the dump site where Bailey's body had been hidden. The police became increasingly convinced that Jared had removed a potential witness, making him the primary suspect in both cases. On July 27th, a diner in Arizona reported seeing a man resembling Jared who dined alone and paid with cash. Surveillance footage confirmed it was Jared. Then, on July 30th, in New Mexico, a patrol unit stopped a car with a broken taillight. The driver appeared nervous and possessed fake identification. Fingerprint analysis revealed that it was Jared Bischoff. He was arrested. The authorities found cash, forged documents, and a backpack with clothing in his possession. During questioning, he remained calm and chose not to speak, but the evidence against him was strong. Blood traces matching Bailey's were discovered in a motel, and a knife was found in the apartment. Forensic experts affirmed that the blood on the knife matched blood found in Justin's car, the scene of the crime. Additionally, Jared's DNA was detected on the steering wheel and driver's seat of the car, indicating he had driven it after the incident. Danny Serrano's confession during a second interview ultimately resolved the case. Worried about receiving a life sentence, he decided to cooperate with authorities. He disclosed that Jared was the one who used the knife and fired the fatal shot. Danny also admitted to helping restrain Justin and participating in disposing of the body. His account was consistent with both digital evidence and physical findings. Investigators gathered substantial digital evidence, including geolocation data, message history, and patterns of communication. Forensic linguists analyzed messages sent to Tanya from Bailey's phone number and determined they were actually written by a man. This confirmed prior findings. Jared and Bailey had worked together, with Jared being the mastermind and the one who directly committed the crime. In the spring of 2017, a trial started for Jared Bischoff. He was indicted on charges of first-degree murder in connection with the death of Justin Hilbert and Bailey Sharp, conspiracy, and evidence destruction. The jury found him guilty on all charges, and he received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. His lawyer chose not to appeal the verdict based on the evidence presented. Additionally, Danny Serrano was charged by the district attorney's office with aiding and abetting in a first-degree crime and obstruction of justice. His trial occurred in the fall of 2017, and he was also found guilty by the jury. During sentencing, the court took into account his substance abuse issues and his lesser role in the crime, resulting in a 25-year sentence without the possibility of parole for the first 20 years. One of Jared's former military colleagues revealed that, before the crime took place, Jared often expressed intense resentment towards Tanya. He believed she had destroyed his life, taken everything from him. He saw her as something he owned, and her new partner as a challenge to his authority. What happened to Justin wasn't merely revenge. It was Jared's attempt to emotionally damage Tanya. At first, Jared intended to go after both Justin and Tanya. However, Danny reported that he changed his plan. Jared supposedly said that causing physical death would be too easy and that true suffering would come from leaving someone alive. He thought that if she survived, she would endure ongoing pain for the rest of her life. Jared believed Tanya's greatest suffering would come from losing the person she loved, experiencing fear and isolation, and having to face her son every day. For this reason, Justin became the target.
Bree Kristen Kuhn was born in May 1987 in the United States and grew up with her parents and her older brother, Eric. The family lived in Pennsylvania until her parents divorced. Following the divorce, Bree and Eric moved to Texas with their mother, whose name has not been disclosed. When Eric entered 9th grade, Bree left Texas to live with their father in New York. At that time, their father was in a new relationship with a woman named Karen. Though Bree and her brother Eric lived apart, they remained close, staying in touch on important occasions. However, their relationship with their mother became strained over time. According to Eric, their mother was physically abusive, and Bree would often defend him. She took on the role of a protector, enduring the abuse herself to keep her brother safe. These traumatic experiences profoundly affected Bree, leading her to struggle with depression and anxiety throughout her adolescence. By the age of 13, she had attempted to end her life. In the face of adversity, Bree focused on her education, attending 2 community colleges. While still young, she enlisted in the U.S. Navy, where she served for 17 years at various naval stations across the country. In 2009, she welcomed her first child, a daughter named Kay, with her then partner, James. Although their relationship ended, Bree retained custody of Kay, while James was granted weekend visitation rights. She later began a relationship with Colin Turner, a fellow service member in the military. Colin James Turner, born on December 28, 1987, was raised in a close-knit, religious family alongside his parents, Tirva Donald Turner, and his sisters, Nicole and Rebecca. Known for his warmth and strong family values, Colin served in the Marine Corps with a specialization in explosive ordnance disposal. He married Casey Gatzman in 2009, and they had a son that same year. After the separation, custody of the children went to Casey, but Colin remained actively involved in his son's care and life. On May 29, 2016, Colin married Bree, and together they started a family with Bree's daughter, Kay. Colin embraced the role of Kay's father, treating her as his own, which deeply endeared her to his family. In April 2017, Bree and Colin welcomed their son, John Patrick, followed by their daughter, Lonnie, in August 2018. After 14 years of service, Colin retired from the Marines and began studying electrical engineering at Arizona State University. He also managed to balance his studies with his responsibilities as a parent, such as helping Kay with distance learning. By this time, the family had settled in Gulf Breeze, Florida, a community recognized for its safety and family-friendly environment. Despite outward appearances of stability, underlying issues were present in Bree and Colin's relationship. She confided to her brother, Eric, that her relationship with Colin was strained. When Eric visited to help mediate, Colin reportedly joked, both privately and in front of Bree, that they got along because they were both narcissistic psychopaths. Eric also noticed Bree felt burdened as the family's sole financial provider, while Colin focused on his studies and childcare. Although Eric encouraged Bree to leave the relationship, she hesitated. Her concerns include that Colin could use her mental health history and his family's finances to gain a legal advantage in a custody battle. In April 2021, she attempted to end her life by overdosing on pills and alcohol while speaking on the phone with Eric. Panicked, Eric contacted Colin, who was at home with Bree but reportedly did not help her. He ultimately called emergency services, and she was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility for 10 days. A month later, she returned to the facility for another week. During her recovery, Bree attributed much of her emotional distress to job-related stress and accused Colin of interfering with her work, which she said exacerbated her difficulties. However, she never publicly accused him of psychological, physical, or emotional abuse. After her hospitalization, she joined an intensive outpatient program and resumed her career at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola. In her role as an assistant to the command chief, Bree was able to continue her treatment while serving under limited-duty sailor status. In the months leading up to the tragedy, Bree began seeking legal assistance. On Wednesday, September 8, 2021, she reached out to a group of mothers on a messaging app, asking for recommendations for a lawyer. She mentioned that the situation could escalate, as it involved disputes over children and property. At 12:53 p.m. that same day, Bree called 911 to report a domestic dispute with her husband, Colin, and requested police assistance at their home. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived at the scene. Colin, her husband, was calmly sitting in a beach chair at the end of the driveway. He informed the officers that Bree had a shotgun, a pistol in the bedroom, and admitted that he also had a firearm in his truck. Colin emphasized that Bree was the one who had called the police. When the officers asked about her whereabouts, he led one of them to the home's entrance and pointed toward the kitchen. As the officer entered, Bree's young son approached, curiously asking about the officer's equipment. Shortly afterward, Bree appeared, looking visibly frustrated. The police officer explained that they could not intervene immediately unless there were obvious injuries or specific evidence of violence. Bree responded bitterly, sarcastically stating that she would make things clearer next time. The officer attempted to de-escalate the situation, explaining that without a court order or restraining order, they could not prevent Colin from seeing or taking the children, especially since 2 of them were biologically his. When asked if she wanted to file a formal complaint, she declined, saying she just wanted to leave the house with her children. The officer informed her that he would speak to Colin while she gathered her belongings. While the officers were speaking with Colin, Bree began transferring items from Colin's truck to hers. Noticing this, Colin firmly stated that he would not allow her to take the children. He argued that he was their primary caregiver and claimed that he intended to take them to his parents' home in Georgia for a few days to let tensions cool down. He also denied having any intention of keeping the children away from Bree. One of the officers advised Colin that, as long as no violence was involved, parenting disputes were not matters for police intervention. When asked if he wanted to file a formal report, he agreed. The officers retrieved paperwork from their patrol vehicle and provided forms to both parties. When Bree saw her form, she asked what she should do if her husband hit her after they left. The officer advised her to use her phone's camera to document any evidence. The officers then departed. A few hours later, around 5 p.m., there was another 911 call from their home, this time from Colin. When the police arrived again, they found Colin outside, holding the youngest child. He told the officers that Bree was refusing to let him back into the house. She then went outside and tried to take the child from his arms. The officers intervened and asked Bree to go back inside to allow for a calm discussion. After confirming that Colin lived in and co-owned the house, an officer informed him that he had the legal right to enter the property, though they discouraged him from using force. The officer emphasized that Colin's access to the home was a lawful right. Concerned about another confrontation, he requested that the officer accompany him inside. Colin explained that Bree had attempted to take the child into the house, but the child had started screaming, refusing to go in without him. When the officer asked if any physical conflict had occurred, Colin said no but mentioned that the situation was part of a long-standing dispute that had lasted for years. Bree, on the other hand, told the officers that they were discussing divorce and claimed Colin intended to take the children to Georgia. She further accused him of being physically aggressive, adding that the earlier police visit had failed to protect her. She also alleged that Colin had contacted her superiors at work and possibly made claims of emotional abuse. The officer reiterated to Bree that she could not legally prevent Colin from entering his own home. He suggested they work out a temporary arrangement, such as staying in separate bedrooms and minimizing contact, for the well-being of their children. However, Bree refused, expressing concern that allowing Colin inside could lead to more violence. She again brought up her previous allegations of abuse and expressed fear of being harmed. The officer advised her to document any future incidents, but it was clear Bree was seeking more than just advice. She wanted protection that the current system was not equipped to provide. When the officer suggested that everyone enter the house together, Bree refused. The officer then turned to Colin, who calmly provided the children's information. During the exchange, he mentioned Bree's mental health issues. Police confirmed this and said that he had previously intervened in an incident at their home in March, when Bree attempted to harm herself. Police reminded Colin of the same advice they had previously given him, to remain separated within the home for the safety of everyone involved. He also pointed out that standing outside in the intense heat with a small child amidst biting mosquitoes was unsustainable. Before heading inside again, Colin asked the officer to retrieve his wallet, which Bree had allegedly taken from his vehicle. At the door, Bree met the officer. When asked about the wallet, she denied having it and claimed she had only taken Colin's credit card. The officer reminded her that a wallet is personal property, not something to be shared in marriage, and instructed her to return it if she had taken it. In a calm but firm tone, the officer told Bree she had to allow Colin and their daughter back into the house. Bree agreed, but only on the condition that Colin would not harass her or the children. The officer reassured her that if anything happened, she could call them again. As the officer prepared to leave, he returned to inform Colin that Bree claimed she did not know where the wallet was. Colin just smiled and implied that he would let the matter slide. But in reality, nothing was resolved satisfactorily. Less than 2 hours later, at exactly 6:22 p.m., a third and final 911 call came from their residence. Colin James Turner, just 33 years old, had been fatally shot. The final fatal gunshot rang out while the 911 operator was still on the line. On the porch, officers found Bree, then 34, sitting calmly. As they approached, she spontaneously confessed that she had shot her husband. She was taken into custody without resistance. When asked about the children, she said she had taken them to a neighbor who lived a few houses down. Paramedics checked her over while officers ensured that she was physically stable. When asked if she could breathe properly or needed medical care, she didn't respond, so emergency personnel were instructed to evaluate her. Bree was brought to the police station for questioning. The interrogation was slow, interrupted by long silences and frequent bouts of crying. During the interview, Bree opened up about the state of her marital relationship. She said Colin was the primary caregiver for their children and admitted that she believed she had little chance of winning custody due to her history of mental health struggles. She revealed that Colin had threatened to take the children to Georgia and had physically assaulted her. He had also warned that if she reported him, no one would believe her because of her mental health issues, calling her crazy. Bree confessed that she had removed the batteries from the garage door opener to stop Colin from leaving with the children. She claimed that Colin only pretended to care about her mental health as a way to manipulate her, especially after she decided to file for divorce. She mentioned that she had a legal appointment scheduled for the next day. She also mentioned that she had an appointment with a lawyer scheduled for the next day. When asked what had happened just before the attack, Bree said her memory after the second police visit was hazy. She recalled Colin attempting to enter the house through the garage but failing because the way was blocked. However, she said he then used a side door to enter the house. She claimed she tried to stop him, but her next clear memory was knocking on a neighbor's door. She remembered leaving her children there to ensure their safety before returning home to help her husband. Investigators pressed her for a more comprehensive account, but she could only provide scattered details. She said she returned to the garage and saw blood everywhere. Throughout the questioning, Bree repeatedly asked to call her father. Eventually, she was allowed to make the call, which lasted 18 minutes and consisted mostly of sobbing. Her father tried to comfort her, suggesting she would likely spend the night in jail and urging her to seek help if she felt like harming herself again. He reassured her that things could improve and told her to stay strong and look for hope. Toward the end of the call, Bree asked if her father could take custody of her two youngest children. He didn't give a definitive answer, suggesting instead that they would need to discuss it with Colin's mother. He also advised her to cooperate with a public defender if necessary until a more suitable legal option became available. At the end of the call, Bree painfully confesses she doesn't know what's worse, knowing that Colin is dead or realizing that she was the one who killed him. A month later, in early October 2021, Bree was indicted by a Santa Rosa County grand jury for first-degree premeditated murder in connection to the death of her husband, Colin. Prosecutors had not yet decided whether to seek life imprisonment or the death penalty. On October 16, Colin's family and friends gathered for a military funeral to honor his 14 years of service in the U.S. Marine Corps. During the ceremony, the American flag symbolizing his service was presented to his eldest son, Brody Turner. The youngest children of his were adopted by his parents, who always strived to love and support him despite enduring an irreparable loss. After 3 years of delays, Bree's long-awaited trial began on Tuesday, September 24, 2024, at the Santa Rosa County Courthouse. Now 37 years old, Bree faced accusations of committing a premeditated and calculated act of murder. The prosecution carefully outlined the events of September 8, 2021, arguing that Bree intentionally killed her husband following a day of escalating conflict. Meanwhile, the defense presented a drastically different narrative, asserting that Bree was a victim of battered woman syndrome. They argued that she had endured years of psychological and emotional abuse from Colin, who had become increasingly unstable after suffering a traumatic brain injury during his military service. The defense maintained that he posed a significant threat to her and their children. Over 4 days, the court heard testimony from various witnesses. The jury and those in the courtroom reviewed full body cam footage from responding officers, which captured their interactions on the day of the incident. The recordings revealed Bree's sarcasm, Colin's calm demeanor, and the chilling 911 call during which gunshots were recorded in real time. Every officer involved testified, including one officer who described the crime scene in detail, recounting the sight of the garage, blood, Colin's body slumped in a chair, and a holstered weapon nearby. A crime scene analyst presented a series of photographs to help jurors visualize where Colin's body was found. Evidence collected included shell casings, bullet fragments, and Colin's phone, which was still connected to the 911 operator, lying beneath him. Prescriptions for Bree's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and mental health treatment were submitted as evidence, along with testimony from her supervisor, Craig Forum, from the Pensacola Naval Station. Craig explained that Bree had been placed on limited duty due to mental health issues. He said that on the day of the shooting, Bree did not show up for work, and Colin called him to inform him that Bree had cut off the family's financial access and damaged the electronics in the house. Colin also told Craig that she had missed therapy sessions and that he was considering moving the children to Georgia. Craig testified that Colin remained calm and spoke in a composed manner throughout the call. He also provided Colin with contact information for a family counselor. Soon after, he spoke to Bree, who accused her husband of lying and being unreasonable in taking the children away. On the trial's second day, forensic pathologist Dr. Diana Oleski was called to testify for the prosecution. Although she did not personally perform Colin's autopsy, she reviewed the results and formed her conclusion. The autopsy revealed that Colin had been shot 4 times, all from behind. The bullets entered between his shoulders and chest. One particularly devastating shot passed through his left shoulder, exited the side of his neck, and lodged in his right wrist. The injuries caused extensive trauma, including punctured lungs, fractured ribs, damage to cervical vertebrae, a ruptured spleen, spinal cord injuries, and damage to the pericardium, the heart's protective membrane. Diana concluded that Colin would have survived for only a few minutes following the pericardial injury. When the defense attorney asked if there was any evidence to indicate that Colin's arm was broken, since he had claimed during the 911 call that Bree had tried to break his arm, Diana responded that there were no signs of injuries consistent with that statement. Eric, Bree's brother, was the next to testify. He recounted a phone conversation with Bree months earlier, on the day she attempted to end her life. During that call, she told him she had taken pills mixed with alcohol. Eric stated that when he informed Colin of this, Colin showed no concern and took no action to help, prompting Eric to step in and call for assistance. Eric also mentioned that Bree had always feared losing her children, believing Colin's family's wealth and legal resources would work against her. On the day of the attack, Eric said Bree was especially anxious because she had an upcoming surgery and feared that Colin would use that time to take the children. He recalled speaking to Bree several times that day, noting her mood alternated between calm and distressed. During their final 45-minute call, Eric said he overheard Bree arguing with Colin, followed by shouting and the sound of objects being thrown. He claimed that Bree had then picked up a weapon. When asked how Eric knew this, he hesitated, saying he believed Bree had told him. Eric begged her to leave with the children, but she didn't listen. The call ended with Bree saying that she was not going to take the kids, followed by the sound of gunshots, crying children, and Bree repeatedly saying that she had killed him and that she needed to call the police. However, Eric's testimony was inconsistent under cross-examination. His account differed from his initial statements to detectives in Pennsylvania. He attributed these contradictions to the claim that his first interview had not been recorded, a claim the detective denied. With that, the prosecution rested its case. The defense initially planned to present Bree's defense through testimony from a mental health expert and Bree herself to explain battered woman syndrome. However, they unexpectedly changed strategy, opting not to present these testimonies and offering no public explanation for their decision. Instead, the defense called James, Bree's ex-husband and the father of her eldest daughter, Kay. James testified about the incident on the day of the shooting. He stated that he exchanged text messages with Colin and later received a phone call from Bree. During the call, Bree had told him that he needed to come get Kay and that she had just shot Colin. When he had asked why, she had responded that she didn't know. James immediately went to pick up his daughter. James also testified in court that he had always thought highly of Colin as a stepfather and that Kay had spoken positively about him. On the third day of the trial, proceedings were interrupted by a hurricane warning, delaying closing arguments until Friday, September 27th. During the prosecution's closing argument, they emphasized that Bree showed no visible injuries on the day of the shooting. They argued that Bree deliberately provoked Colin, secretly filmed the confrontation on her phone, and kept her brother on the line during the incident. They contended that her motive was not self-defense but a desire to assert control. The prosecution concluded that, being unable to provoke aggression from Colin, Bree attacked him 4 times in the back without realizing he was on a 911 call. The defense argued that Colin had been walking around the house with a firearm and suggested he hid the weapon in his truck before police arrived. They referenced Colin's 911 call, where he claimed Bree tried to break his arm, a claim contradicted by the autopsy. One of the defense attorneys mocked Colin's actions during the call, asserting that, as a Marine, he should have handled the situation differently, further implying that his response would have been ridiculed by others in his military unit. The defense ultimately claimed that Bree resorted to attacking Colin because law enforcement had repeatedly failed to protect her despite her pleas for help. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. During the sentencing hearing, the judge allowed Colin's parents to speak about the impact of the incident. Colin's mother expressed gratitude for having custody of her grandchildren and stated her intent to adopt them. She condemned Bree not only for taking her son's life but also for attempting to tarnish his reputation. Colin's father spoke of his sadness and disappointment in Bree's actions, sharing that the children were doing well in school and surrounded by love. The judge then sentenced Bree Kristen Kuhn to life in prison. Although the verdict has been announced, the case is not over yet. On October 3, 2024, Bree's legal team filed an appeal with the Florida Court of Appeals, challenging her conviction and requesting a new trial. Meanwhile, Bree was discharged from the U.S. Navy with a general discharge under honorable conditions after 17 years of service, thus avoiding further military disciplinary action.
Mysterious disappearances often attract a lot of public and media attention. In many cases, There are no clear explanations or theories, and speculation continues without confirmation. Investigations can remain open for many years, sometimes even decades. A notable and unsettling case involves the disappearance of a young French woman named Roxane Benest and a man of Moroccan descent, Nabil Tourougui, who had just met her. They had arranged what appeared to be an ordinary date, but neither of them came back. Their sudden disappearance captured widespread attention throughout Europe. Let's examine the details we know about this perplexing case. Nabil Tourougui was born in 1999 in Nouvelle-Aquitaine, France. He was the second of 5 siblings, the only son in a modest middle-class family. His parents and younger sisters still live in the same hometown. From a young age, Nabil showed exceptional intelligence, seriousness, and determination. He excelled in school, particularly in math and science. He aspired to earn a college degree, moved to Europe for better opportunities. Nabil possessed qualities that indicated he was destined for success. He had a close, loving relationship with his parents and sisters, supporting each other unconditionally, sharing everything without secrets. Those who knew Nabil described him as polite, calm, and genuinely kind, always willing to help others. He was also recognized for his humility and shyness. After finishing high school, he began looking for ways to move to Europe for further education. His older sister had relocated to Belgium 2 years earlier, where she enrolled in a university and later got married. She and her husband settled in Blankenberg, a coastal town in West Flanders. At 19, Nabil decided to move to France, specifically to Biarritz, a seaside resort on the Basque coast at Cape Saint Martin. The town has a population of about 25,000. It was once a retreat for royalty and aristocrats seeking relaxation. Today, it is popular with surfers from around the globe. However, Nabil's move to Biarritz was not for leisure. He was accepted into a respected engineering school, where he quickly gained a reputation as a talented student. In 2021, he graduated and soon received an attractive job offer from a major corporation. The flexible work schedule was ideal for him. Nabil adapted well to life in France and formed a broad circle of friends. He remained closely connected to his family, regularly communicating with his parents and sisters, and making annual visits home for holidays. He frequently visited his older sister, providing her support in various ways, and even became the godfather of her child. Roxane Benest was born in 2001 in Saint-Laurent-de-Siré, Charente. She grew up in a modest, middle-income family as the middle child of 3 siblings, with an older sister and a younger brother. Her parents prioritized their children's education and worked hard to help them build a bright future. Although Roxane wasn't the top student in school, she was known for her big heart and her desire to help others. Her friends described her as kind, generous, and hardworking. Roxane had a natural talent for connecting with people and enjoyed activities like reading, drawing, and photography. After graduating from high school, she moved to the beautiful town of Biarritz and started taking nursing assistant courses. Shortly after, she began working as a caregiver in a nursing home. Her colleagues and the residents consistently praised her compassion, kindness, and sense of responsibility. She treated everyone with warmth, understanding, initially or to help with rent costs after relocating to a new city. Roxane shared an apartment with 2 friends. However, once she secured steady employment and earned a reliable income, she moved into her own place in a quiet residential complex on the edge of town. Roxane maintained a close relationship with her parents, sister, and brother, which is why she made it a priority to return home for family gatherings on weekends whenever possible. Roxane worked long hours and frequently felt tired. Her hectic schedule left her with little time to socialize beyond her coworkers and the people she cared for at work. However, she never voiced her frustrations. Roxane believed that things would improve in due time. To stay connected with friends, she maintained several social media profiles where she shared her interests. In January 2022, she met Nabil on one of these platforms. Nabil had been working hard and hadn't had much time for relationships. He rarely used social media, never thought of it as a way to meet someone special until he saw Roxane's profile. Her warm smile and kind energy instantly attracted him. prompting him to send her a message. Roxane accepted his friend request, soon found herself enjoying their connection. At first, when their conversations were casual, fun, but they quickly realized they had a lot in common, including shared interests in similar outlooks on life. Talking became a daily habit for them. They exchanged phone numbers and started having regular conversations, sometimes lasting for hours. Neither of them had any particular goals. They were just enjoying each other's company. They chose to take their time and really get to know one another instead of rushing into anything. During a visit with his older sister, Nabil mentioned that he had met someone who felt like a kindred spirit. He didn't provide details but promised to share more later. Meanwhile, Roxane told her sister about her new friend, describing Nabil as kind, thoughtful, and intelligent. Their busy work schedules made it hard to meet in person, even though they lived only a few dozen miles apart. Eventually, their days off matched up, and they decided to meet at a cozy cafe. Coincidentally, the date was February 14th of Valentine's Day. Neither intended for it to happen on that day, but they both saw it as a positive sign. Nabil and Roxane had a fantastic time together, discussing their past experiences and future aspirations. They shared laughter and stories, genuinely enjoying their time with one another. Neither of them was let down. Instead, they both sensed a real connection that could develop into a significant relationship. They even took a photo together that day and shared it on their social media profiles, tagging each other. This photo would later receive a lot of attention from the media when their names appeared in headlines, not just in France but throughout Europe. In the picture, they looked happy and relaxed. They had no idea that they had less than a week left to enjoy their current lives. Shortly after their first meeting, the two began planning a second date, which was set for Friday, February 18th, 2022. Both were eager and wanted to make it a memorable evening in a romantic setting. Roxane chose to keep her new relationship private for now. None of her co-workers or close friends knew she was dating someone. She only shared her feelings with her sister, telling her that she might be falling in love as she prepared for the upcoming second date with the guy she met online. Nabil sent a message to his older sister, telling her he had a date planned for that evening. He didn't provide any details about the girl or her name, but he hinted that he hoped to introduce her to the family soon. That Friday was a lovely sunny day, lasting until sunset. Roxane and Nabil was seen strolling along the boardwalk, where Roxane took some photos of the scenery and shared them on her social media. Later, they were seen at a cafe, sitting together, chatting, and laughing. Witnesses noted that they appeared relaxed and happy. Not long after, they disappeared without a trace. Nabil's close friend was the first to notice something was wrong. Nabil had promised to visit him at 10 p.m. that night to help him with an engineering project for his final thesis. Nabil said he would come after dropping off his date, but he never arrived neither that night nor the next morning. He wasn't replying to messages, and calls went straight to voicemail, indicating his phone was likely turned off. This behavior was completely out of character for Nabil, who was known for being reliable and keeping his promises. If something unexpected had happened, he would have communicated it to someone. Concerned, Nabil's friend reached out to Nabil's sister. She quickly informed their parents and alerted the local authorities. On February 19th, Roxane was supposed to work her shift, but she never arrived, which was unusual for her as she was a reliable employee who had never been late before. Her phone went unanswered, and her messages on all platforms were also ignored. That same day, Roxane's co-workers reached out to her parents to inform them that she was missing. Her family immediately went to Biarritz. Roxane's older sister had a spare key to her rental apartment, but when they arrived, the apartment was empty. All of Roxane's belongings were still there, and there were no signs of a struggle or that she had packed in a hurry. No one had heard from Roxane since the previous evening, and her friends and colleagues had not seen or spoken to her during that time. All they knew was that she had gone on a date with a guy she met online. Concerned, her parents quickly filed a missing person report with the local police. Initially, reports for both Roxane and Nabil were handled separately because no one could confirm who they had gone out with. However, both families later mentioned that the authorities seemed to lack urgency in addressing the cases, even stating that both individuals were adults who had the right to privacy and weren't required to keep their families informed about their whereabouts. Due to the lack of urgency from authorities, both families decided to take matters into their own hands and started organizing searches through social media. Roxane's sister discovered the name of the man Roxane was supposed to meet and found his social media profile. There, she came across a post from his family indicating that he was also missing and had not been heard from since Friday. Simultaneously, Nabil's sister found Roxane's profile and saw pictures of them together. On Sunday, February 20th, the families of Roxane and Nabil finally connected. Initially, there was tension and distrust between them. Roxane's family feared that Nabil might have harmed their daughter, while Nabil's family worried that Roxane might have influenced their shy son negatively. However, they soon recognized that they were facing the same tragic situation and began working together to search. The families worked hard to find anyone who might have information about Roxane and Nabil's location. They created social media groups to share photos of Roxane and Nabil, asking the public for tips that could assist in the investigation. Friends and colleagues of both individuals joined in, printing flyers, distributing them throughout the community. The flyers included important details to identify them. Roxane had several distinctive tattoos, and Nabil had a noticeable birthmark. Additionally, both of their cars were missing. Nabil drove a silver Renault Clio 3, and Roxane recently purchased a blue Peugeot. The families also organized searches for the vehicles on their own, but those efforts did not yield any results. The police launched a full search on Monday morning, more than 48 hours after Roxane and Nabil were last seen. The delay was based on the belief that they might have taken an unplanned weekend trip without telling anyone. However, as time passed and their phones stayed off, it became apparent that something was seriously wrong. Sadly, this meant that crucial time had already been wasted. Investigators confirmed that Roxane and Nabil was last seen together at a fast food restaurant, with several eyewitnesses and surveillance footage confirming their presence. However, their cars were not located in the nearby parking lot. Since that area tends to be very busy on Friday nights, they may have parked farther away due to a lack of available spaces. The theory was quickly backed up by new evidence. Roxane's car was found parked in a small side street nearby, and everything inside seemed untouched. There were no signs of struggle, no stains, and nothing appeared out of order. This led investigators to believe that they may have chosen to continue their night elsewhere and left in Nabil's car. However, their destination remained unclear. 2 days later, Nabil's car was discovered parked near the Biarritz Lighthouse, a popular tourist spot on a cliff. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras in that area, making it impossible to know what time Roxane and Nabil arrived. The only camera located at the lighthouse had stopped working weeks before, leaving no recorded footage. Investigators found several personal items belonging to both Roxane and Nabil inside Nabil's car. Roxane's phone was mounted on the dashboard in GPS mode. Although it was fully charged, it hadn't been used after a certain point, which helped authorities trace the couple's exact movements. In the back seat, there was Nabil's laptop, and on the passenger seat, Roxane's purse with her keys, cash, and bank cards. It seemed as though they had only stepped out for a moment, planning to come back soon. There were no signs of foul play in the car, only their fingerprints were present, and everything appeared undisturbed. Investigators quickly ruled out robbery or any targeted attack. The only item missing was Roxane's camera, which she likely took with her to capture photos that evening. Her phone eventually died, while Nabil's last phone signal was recorded around 6:30 p.m. from a location near the Virgin Rock viewpoint on the way to the lighthouse, which offers stunning views of the Atlantic Ocean. This route features several lookout terraces built into the cliffside. Although the day started off clear, strong winds developed into a severe storm by evening. The rough weather along the coast became particularly dangerous, with violent waves crashing against the cliffs. Peak storm conditions aligned with the last recorded activity from Nabil's phone, indicating Roxane and Nabil was at the lighthouse at that time. Based on the evidence gathered, investigators pieced together the following scenario. After dining at a restaurant, Roxane and Nabil chose to visit a lighthouse to watch the sunset. Roxane, an avid photographer, brought her camera to capture the beautiful scenery, While they were at one of the lookout points, the weather suddenly turned severe. As they attempted to return to their car, they were hit by large waves that lashed against the cliffs, possibly sweeping them away. Most evidence supported this version of events, leading law enforcement to initially determine that there was no foul play involved and consider closing the case. They even suggested a theory that Roxane and Nabil may have chosen to end their lives together, which would allow them to avoid extensive investigations and simply archive the case materials. However, Roxane and Nabil's families strongly rejected this conclusion. They insisted that the investigation remain active. As no bodies had been found, there was still hope that Roxane and Nabil might be alive and in need of assistance. Roxane's sister discovered a notebook in her apartment that had passwords for her social media accounts. After accessing the accounts and looking through her recent messages, nothing concerning or unusual was found. It was clear that Roxane had been primarily communicating with Nabil. Their relationship appeared to be loving and respectful, with both expressing enthusiasm about their time together. They carefully planned their dates and demonstrated real concern for each other. There were no signs that either of them had contemplated ending their lives. Law enforcement stated that all options were still being explored until Nabil and Roxane were located, whether alive or deceased. One theory proposed that Roxane and Nabil may have decided to go into hiding voluntarily, but both families strongly opposed this notion. Since they went missing, neither Nabil nor Roxane has used their bank cards, checked their emails, logged into social media, or turned on any electronic devices. Nabil's family, who lived in an area known for safety issues, feared that Roxane and Nabil might have been abducted. To assist in the search for their son, Nabil's parents decided to hire a private investigator. They feared that someone might be holding Nabil and his friend captive while awaiting ransom demands. Unfortunately, they never received any communication indicating that was the case. Meanwhile, Roxane's family leaned more toward the official theory that Roxane and Nabil had been caught in a tragic accident. There had been previous incidents at the same cliff near the lighthouse where tourists were swept away by rough waves. Still, Roxane's relatives insisted that the couple couldn't be declared deceased until their remains were recovered. Due to the ongoing storm, search efforts at sea were limited to helicopters and drones, as it was too dangerous to send in boats or divers. By the time the weather calmed down, too much time had passed, and no trace of there could be found. Over 3 years have passed since Roxane and Nabil disappeared, and the case is still open. Initially, the search focused on nearby towns, but it has now expanded to include neighboring European countries where remains could potentially be found under certain conditions. While the search began with physical descriptions, both families later provided DNA samples to help identify any unidentified remains that might be discovered. Unfortunately, despite these efforts, no trace of Nabil or Roxane has been found. Both families have often voiced their frustration with what they see as the police's slow response. Right from the beginning, investigators seemed to believe that Roxane and Nabil had drowned and did not explore other possibilities, which led the relatives to take action themselves. Months later, it was found that a small hotel near the lighthouse had a surveillance camera that recorded part of the path to the lookout point. That footage could have revealed whether Nabil and Roxane went that way. Sadly, no one requested the recordings, and they were automatically deleted after 30 days. The most troubling aspect is that, even after all this time, neither Roxane and Nabil's bodies nor their belongings, including Roxane's camera, have been located. For many years, the families have contacted agencies in Spain, the UK, and other countries to ask about any unidentified remains. Nabil's family still holds on to hope that he might be alive but unable to contact anyone because he is being held somewhere. Both families are still pushing for the case to remain open. They are sharing their story through various media outlets, bloggers, and influencers, hoping someone will eventually provide information about what happened to Roxane and Nabil on February 18th, 2022.